Chapter 123. Chen Qizhong thought that even though Zhang Yan's 16 swords in one breath looked magnificent, he would eventually reveal his flaws after a long time. When the time came, he would find an opportunity to kill Zhang Yan with one strike. Therefore, he suppressed his anger from Chen Tong's death and patiently fought with Zhang Yan. Unexpectedly, the fight went on for 2 hours. Not only did Zhang Yan not make any mistakes, his sword moves became more and more skillful. Chen Qizhong couldn't help but be shocked. This junior was clearly very inexperienced when he first started to control the sword. How could he control the 16 swords for such a long time without any disorder? If it was an ordinary cultivator, even if he could split the swords into 16 swords, he would definitely be flustered and lose his footing. However, this sword had already developed its own consciousness. After Zhang Yan's spirit merged with it, it was like it belonged to him. 16 swords might seem like a lot, but in fact, it was not much different from one sword slash. In the beginning, Zhang Yan only focused on defending. However, as time passed, he was able to counterattack once or twice in 100 moves, and gradually, he was able to counterattack for more than 10 moves. In the end, he was actually able to attack and defend at the same time. Even Chen Qizhong felt that something was wrong. He thought angrily, this junior is using me to train his sword moves. It's a pity that my sword board was taken away by the sect when I was chased out of the sect. Otherwise, I could use it to set up a sword formation. Breaking this junior's moves would be as easy as flipping my hand. Every disciple of Yuan Yang's sword sect had a sword board. It was a magical treasure and also a formation map. It contained 36 sword formations. Chen Qizhong had cultivated 7 White Tiger Mystic Light Sword Qi, so he could use the sword board to set up the Big Dipper sword formation. It was not something that could be blocked by ordinary sword moves. Hua Yin glanced at Zhang Yan's face a few times. He pondered for a moment and took out a jade tablet from his sleeve. There was a picture of a crane flapping its wings carved on it. This was a defensive item given to him by a Taoist who was a good friend of Nanhua sect. When he was in danger, he could summon a mystical bird to help him fight. He muttered something, shook the talisman, and said, "Undo." The illusory image on the talisman came to life, and a ball of flame pounced out, rolling on top of the cloud, instantly transforming into an immortal crane covered in fiery feathers and flowing light. The crane stood in the air, spread its wings, and let out a clear cry as it pounced towards Zhang Yan. Before it even got close, a surging wave of heat assaulted him. This fire crane was a Xian bird refined by the Southern Flower sect. Although it didn't pose much of a threat to a mystic light realm cultivator, Chen Qizhong was trying to mess up Zhang Yan's mind and force him to reveal an opening. Zhang Yan smiled coldly and shouted, "Where is Ao Tong?" A dragon's roar resounded through the sky, and a demonic dragon covered in golden scales extended its claws and swung its tail in the air. Its body was 6 feet long, but its ferocious eyes were flickering with a hint of cunning. When it saw the fire crane, it laughed loudly and said, "So it's a sparrow with fire. Watch me, old Ao, pluck out all your feathers." After it finished speaking, it arched its back and pressed its 4 claws on top of the cloud. It leaped up and fought with the fire crane. Ao Tong was an ancient demonic dragon, and its scales were impervious to fire and water, so he naturally wasn't afraid of the fierce flames on the fire crane. He thought to himself, "This fire bird is very easy to deal with, but after I lose, old Ao doesn't have the ability to fight that cultivator again. Why don't I just make the sound a little louder, and there's no need to rush to kill this fire bird." Immediately, the 2 strange beasts were pecking and biting each other in the air, roaring continuously. The sound was even more shocking than that of Zhang Yan. Chen Qizhong frowned as he watched. He took out an ancient short sword from his sleeve and hid it. After fighting with Zhang Yan for a few rounds, he carefully moved to an advantageous position. Without making a sound, he shook his wrist, and a black light flew out of his hand, flying towards Zhang Yan's face. Zhang Yan's gaze had a hint of ridicule. He shook his sleeve, and the heart-striking hammer transformed into a red light as it met the attack. With a clang sound, the hammer directly broke the short sword into two. He didn't take advantage of the situation and instead waved his sleeve, retrieving the treasured hammer. He then concentrated on dealing with the 7 white tiger sword cheese. The corners of Chen Qizhong's eyes twitched. After fighting for a long time, whether it was the magical beast or the flying sword, he couldn't do anything to the other party. He cursed in his heart, "If I didn't break out of the door and teacher didn't take away all the magical treasures on me, how could I let you be so arrogant in front of me? Even if I have to sacrifice my vitality today, I will cut down this junior with my sword." His eyes seemed to shoot out cold lightning. With a point of his finger, the sword below flashed, and the 7 sword cheese slashed at Zhang Yan over 100 times like a torrential downpour, forcing him back 100 feet. Then, he raised his hand, and the long sword on his back let out a clear cry. It leaped out of its sheath and said, "Divine Monarch commands, subdue the spirit and chi. Today, I issue the decree, 1,000 swords return to one." The long sword shook in the air, and the 7 white tiger profound light sword cheese seemed to be restrained, and all of them were thrown into the long sword. When the 7 sword cheese were collected, the long sword suddenly shone brightly, and the sword chi soared into the sky, emitting a boundless murderous aura. The 1,000 swords unite technique was to condense all the profound light and sword chi in one's body through the sword, and the might of a single sword strike was comparable to the direct strike of a core transformation stage cultivator. It was absolutely not something a stellar sword ball could resist. However, this sword also consumed a lot of vitality. After this attack, the user would only have 50% to 60% of his original strength. Chen Qizhong felt that the vitality in his body was continuously being sucked out. This was also the first time he used this technique, so he could only grit his teeth and endure. It seemed to take a long time, but in fact, the long sword was full of vitality in an instant. Suddenly, it issued a loud whistling sound, and with a flash, it slashed towards Zhang Yan like a rainbow piercing through the sky. This sword was extremely overbearing, and the sword balls in front of it bounced off one by one. Finally, it directly slashed at Zhang Yan's body, and cut him in half. Chen Qizhong couldn't help but relax when he saw that the junior who had been fighting for a long time had finally died. He showed some signs of exhaustion. Then, he heard a buzzing sound in the air. The white tiger mystic ray and sword chi were bounced out from the sword and returned to his side. However, the sword light seemed a bit dimmer than before, appearing illusory and uncertain. He would need to recuperate for several months before he could recover his strength. Just as he was about to put away the sword and Zhang Yan's star sword ball, he suddenly thought of something. How could the sword ball not scatter when the person died? His face couldn't help but change, and he shouted, "Not good." Chen Qizhong, who was startled, reacted quickly, and withdrew the 7 white tiger profound light sword cheese. He wanted to protect himself first, but he didn't know that at this time, Zhang Yan had already used the invisibility technique to close in on him. At this moment, he didn't need the sword ball, and with a shout, an extremely dazzling golden flame profound light above his head swept towards Chen Qizhong. When the Tai golden flame profound light and the white tiger profound light sword cheese came into contact, there was a sound like silk tearing, and it shattered like fragile porcelain. In the blink of an eye, it was ground to pieces, and it couldn't even be delayed for a moment. Chen Qizhong's eyes were filled with fear, and just as he was about to shout, the profound light swept up and wrapped half of his body, and he immediately died. Zhang Yan quickly flew over, and with a stretch of his hand, he took the person's sleeve. When he passed by, he only waved his sleeve, and the profound light retracted, and the remaining half of the person's body disappeared without a trace. Looking back, he saw that the fire crane was still fighting with Ao Tong. Shaking his head, he didn't care about it, and went to Chen Tong's flying carriage. This flying carriage didn't have anyone driving it, so it naturally floated in the air. Zhang Yan searched for a while, and took away all the personal items on Chen Tong's body, including the Hornless Dragon True Scroll, that was 2/3 deciphered. Then, with a flash of profound light, the three corpses were completely obliterated. Zhang Yan didn't place this flying carriage in his eyes anymore, so he casually put it away. Ao Tong secretly saw that Chen Qizhong had been killed, and his spirit was instantly roused. He immediately gathered his might, and pounced on the fire crane with his 4 claws, and with a few bites, he chewed it to pieces. Then, he flew towards Zhang Yan with a fawning expression. Zhang Yan glanced at him, and scolded jokingly, "You slippery fellow, do you really think that I can't see through your thoughts? It's better for you to stay with me." He shook his sleeves, and kept Ao Tong inside. He looked around, and then at the sky, and thought to himself, "I don't know where that Luo Xinjin was brought to, but I can't go back on my promise to her. However, this girl should be Luo Zhao's cousin, so there's no need for me to go see her. When I return to the sect, I'll let Luo Zhao go see her personally." He muttered to himself for a while, and then took out a messenger talisman. Then, he dipped his finger in the divine sand, and wrote, "See you in a month at Little Wave Mountain." Then, he waved his hand, and the talisman flew away. After doing this, he took a step forward, and a blue light wrapped around his body. In a flash, he left this place, and not long after, he returned to Bamboo Knot Island. After returning to his room and sitting down, Zhang Yan didn't rest. He took out the true scroll of the Hornless Dragon and flipped through it on the table. Seeing that it could still be opened, he made up his mind and flipped through the first 2 volumes, directly to the second volume, and focused on breaking the restrictions. This time, there was no one to disturb him, and in less than a moment, he smoothly read to the end. After reading it, he let out a long sigh and shook his head. He didn't expect that the true scroll of the Hornless Dragon would be so powerful. He didn't think that this true scroll of the Hornless Dragon would actually walk the path of law after the mystic light realm. Originally, he wanted to give it to Luo Zhao to cultivate. The Tao of Law was the most difficult of all the Taos. Every time one cultivated a technique, they had to comprehend a true method from it. Only by understanding the true method could they condense qi into a pill. However, one true method could only form a 7th rank golden core at most. The more true methods one comprehended, the higher the grade of the finished pill. In other words, if one wanted to form a 1st rank golden core, they would need to cultivate at least 3 secret scrolls of the Tao of Law and comprehend the true methods within. However, there were no rules on how to comprehend the true methods, and there was no way to think about it. It all depended on one's luck, and the uncertainty was too great. Most of the cultivators in the world used qi to form the Tao. If they used law to form the Tao, they would probably die of old age before they could comprehend it. Zhang Yan flipped through it a few more times, but he couldn't find the minor technique. Even if there was one, he would need to cultivate this technique to see it. Therefore, he lost interest and put it away. He then took out the Mountain River Cloud Atlas painting. He wanted to see just what was the difference between a true artifact and a spirit artifact. He slowly unfurled the Mountain River Cloud diagram and examined it carefully. On the diagram, there were mountains and rivers, flowers, birds, fish, and insects, and clouds and mist. All of them were vivid and lifelike. What was even more surprising was that when his gaze swept past the city walls, he saw that the people in the bustling city actually had expressions that seemed like real people. Not only that, the sounds of peddlers shouting, the sounds of officials riding on palanquins opening the way, and the sounds of entertainers singing, laughing, angry, and cursing could be faintly heard. Zhang Jia slapped the table and exclaimed in admiration, "This is truly a wonderful painting. It's not worthy of praise, master." Chapter 124. Zhang Yan had once heard that as long as it was a true tool, the true spirit within it would always look down on its master. Sometimes, it would even ignore its master. However, this little boy was very respectful towards him, so he asked, "Are you the true spirit of this painting? Do you have a name?" The boy stood in front of Zhang Yan, lowered his head a little, and said very respectfully, "Master, I do not have a name." This painting of mountains and rivers has followed 12 masters, but most of them put it aside after obtaining it, and had no time to pay attention to me. Only a few of them, when they were bored, would call me out to talk and relieve their boredom. It is already a blessing that they did not scold me. How would they dare to hope for a name? Zhang Yan laughed. So you are also a depressed person. The boy's childish face actually had a hint of desolation, and he sighed. I have heard the ancients say, horses of 1,000 li are common, but Bo Lu is rare. Every time I think about it, I seem to feel the same way. Zhang Yan couldn't help but smile, and he waved his hand, and said pleasantly, Fine, now that you are with me, and since you call yourself a horse of 1,000 li, how about I call you Zhang Ju? The boy was overjoyed, and he knelt down, and said with tears in his eyes, Thank you, master, for giving me a name. Zhang Yan was also deeply moved. This was a true treasure, a treasure that would cause cultivators to fight for it no matter where it was placed. How could this true treasure not be used in battle, and so it was abandoned like a pair of worn-out shoes. It had changed over 10 masters, and none of them had taken a liking to it. Even if it originally had a temper, it had been worn away by now. He picked up the painting, and shook it, and said, I heard that refining a true treasure is not ordinary, and requires the spirit to tell you the method. Let me ask you, how do you refine this painting? Every true treasure has a unique refining method, and only the spirit of the treasure can know the method. So even if you use your ability to forcefully seize a true treasure, as long as the spirit of the treasure is not willing to follow you, you will not be able to use it. No matter what you did, you wouldn't be able to use it. Therefore, many true spirits still needed to negotiate with their masters before they could refine it. The boy, on the other hand, did not have such thoughts. After so many years, there was finally an old master who looked at him in a new light. How could he dare to make things difficult for him? He immediately pointed at the mountain river painting and said, Master, please take a look. The mountains and rivers in this painting are all places that I have been to before. Master only needs to find a place that isn't on the painting and visit it personally. Then, write your name on the seal of the painting with your blood and you will be able to refine it. Zhang Yan frowned slightly and said, You've had more than a dozen masters. There must be very few places you haven't been to. The boy hurriedly said, Master, you don't know. After Yuzi got the map, he didn't look at it too much. Xiaotong's previous master was someone from 600 or 700 years ago. Now that the world has changed, things remain the same, but people have changed. Finding a city that I've never seen before should be an easy task. Zhang Yan nodded and said, No wonder I found the mountains and rivers in the painting familiar, but some places seem to be different. So this is the reason. He pondered for a moment and thought to himself, after leaving the southern swamp, a few hundred miles southwest is the territory of the Great Wei Dynasty's Hong province. The Wei dynasty has only been established for about 200 years. The previous dynasty's chaos lasted for several 60 years and burned down many famous cities. Nowadays, most of the provincial cities are being rebuilt. Why don't I take a look there? He closed the painting and stood up. The boy was quick-witted and didn't wait for him to say anything before he took the initiative to jump into it. Zhang Yan nodded and kept the scroll. He took carefree light and went straight to the capital of Hong province, Anshui city. In a moment, he was above the city. He took out the mountain river painting and unfolded it. He called out, Zhang Ju, what do you think of this place? The boy walked out and took a look. He said happily, this place is very different from how it was a few hundred years ago. Not only are there 2 more rivers, but the location of the city has also changed. Master can open the mountain river painting and you can copy the scenery of this place into the painting. When Zhang Yan heard this, he threw the mountain river painting above his head. The painting unfolded in the air, flipped over, and shone down on the ground. The contents of the painting immediately changed. The boy saw this and said hurriedly, Master, use your blood to write your name on the painting. Zhang Yan forced out a trace of blood essence, stretched out his finger, and wrote his name under the seals on the scroll. The scroll trembled in the air, and instantly spread out above his head. In the blink of an eye, it stretched out several thousand feet, forming a 10,000 miles of rivers and mountains painting that covered the sky and covered the sun. The painting surged in the clouds like waves, showing the mountains and rivers of the 9 continents. The scenery was magnificent and majestic. At this moment, Zhang Yan's heart skipped a beat. He suddenly felt that this painting seemed to have some kind of connection with him, like the star's sword pellet. He didn't say anything. With a thought, the mountain river painting rolled back and kept the boy inside. It automatically fell into his sleeve. He felt that he had gained a lot today. He couldn't help but laugh. He didn't move, but with a flash of blue light, he turned into a rainbow and flew away. After returning to Bamboo Apple Island, Zhang Yan continued to meditate in seclusion every day. The days passed peacefully. For more than 10 days, he learned many tricks of the real form chapter and the art of talisman. Until the end of the month, the sect seemed to finally remember him. The Golden Sword sent a message for him to return to the sect and said that another disciple would be sent to guard Bamboo Apple Island. After receiving the Golden Sword, Zhang Yan didn't waste any time. He rode Carefree Light and returned to the sect. In less than half an eye, he entered the Great Lake of Dragon Abyss. The disciple on duty saw Carefree Light entering the boundary and was about to come over to question him. He immediately sent out a talisman to show his identity. The disciples received the talisman and didn't come forward. They all retreated. Originally, Zhang Yan wanted to return to Spirit Page Island directly. But halfway there, he seemed to have thought of something. He turned the cloud and ran towards Danding Courtyard. He frequently came and went from the Pill Cauldron Academy, and the disciples and strongmen on duty all recognized him as Carefree Light. They knew that he was a proud disciple of the monastery head, so they didn't dare to stop him. Some of the strongmen even stopped respectfully at the side, waiting for him to pass before continuing their patrol. Zhou Chengju was feeding the fish spirit on the boat. But at this moment, his brows were deeply furrowed, as if he had an extremely difficult matter in his heart. Zhang Yan pressed the cloud down and landed on Fish Show's pavilion. He cupped his hands and smiled. "Senior brother, I came uninvited today. Did I spoil your mood?" Zhou Chengju saw Zhang Yan and sighed. "Junior brother Zhang, you're back. If you didn't come today, I would have sent someone to call you." Zhang Yan raised his brows. "Did something happen?" Zhou Chengju looked around and beckoned to him. He whispered, "Come, let's talk inside." Inside the pavilion, the two entered a secret chamber. After Zhang Yan came in and sat down, Zhou Chengju closed the door behind him. He turned around and sat down on a chair. After a moment of silence, he said, "Today, there are many rumors in the sect. They say that you colluded with 3 evildoers to murder our disciples." Zhang Yan's expression didn't change. After thinking for a moment, he knew that this was most likely a trick by Hu Zhiqi and the others. But it was just a mere rumor. Why was Zhou Chengju so nervous? There must be something else going on. Zhou Chengju sighed. If this happened in normal times, it naturally wouldn't cause you any harm. You just treat it as a joke. But now, it's a little troublesome. Speaking of which, I've implicated junior brother. Zhang Yan was surprised. What does senior brother mean? Zhou Chengju shook his head. Do you know that there's a woman in the Feng family called Feng Rao? It's said that she has feelings for you. It's nothing, but she's Qin Yu's most beloved disciple. I don't know who leaked this matter, but when it reached her ears, and she heard that you're my disciple, she immediately got angry. He paused, sighed heavily, and said, I know her temper very well. She doesn't allow others to disobey her. A few days ago, when she heard that Gushua had fallen into the hands of the evildoers, she immediately said that Gushua deserved to die. Gushua's master, Elder Mu, can be considered to have some power, but he didn't dare to open his mouth to defend her. Now, because of this matter, Qin Yu even said in front of the sect head that she wants to take away your position as a successor disciple. Zhou Chengju didn't know what to think, but he let out a sneer. That's not all. Jinren Yan actually said that even if you didn't do anything wrong, but the rumors were everywhere and the sect was in constant turmoil. In order to calm the public, you can be temporarily taken away from the sect head. When the matter becomes clear in the future, if you're really innocent, you can be reported to the sect head and it won't be too late to let you become a successor disciple again. Hearing this, Zhang Yan was also shocked. If his position as a successor disciple was taken away, not only would he lose a protective talisman, but how could the shameful matter of Qinsang School's disciples being captured by the demon clan be brought up again? Therefore, it was impossible for him to become a successor disciple again. Zhou Chengju sighed faintly and said, Meng Zhen and Sun Jinren are trying their best to defend you, but the spiritual masters of the aristocratic families also seem to have some complaints about you. Standing with Jinren Yan and Jinren Yan, the two of them can't suppress you. Zhang Yan wasn't surprised at all. He was the only successor disciple in the past 100 years, and his identity was special. Not only would the aristocratic families not stand on his side, but they would also hit him when he was down. However, he could faintly feel that there seemed to be a familiar hand behind him, as if it had reached out again after being silent for a long time. This time, it seemed like the conflicts that had accumulated in the past had exploded together. However, he could clearly see that the reason things had reached this point was because Qin Jinren, who had a high status, had taken the lead. The others were just adding fuel to the fire. Otherwise, with the status of the spiritual masters, why would they jump out and make things difficult for a little mystic light realm cultivator like him? That would be too degrading. Therefore, the key was still Qin Jinren. Zhang Yan also knew that Qin Jinren and Zhou Chengju were originally a pair of Dao companions, but they had a falling out because of something. However, Zhou Chengju had never said the specifics. Chapter 125. When Zhang Yan heard Zhou Chengju's words, he knew that this immortal Qin was a woman with a strong sense of control. His senior apprentice brother Zhou was refined, quiet, and had his own opinions. After hurting his Dao foundation, he was afraid that he would not be able to stand her temper. Thinking of this, his heart moved, and he said, Senior apprentice brother Zhou often visits the sect leader's place. In addition, almost all the disciples of the various schools need Dan Ding Courtyard's pills. Since he has the heart to take revenge, he will definitely not sit still and wait. He has been in the sect for more than 200 years, so he must have set up many chess pieces. No wonder the disciples of Glittering Jewel Cave never came to Dan Ding Courtyard to ask for pills. Presumably, Immortal Qin knew Zhou Chengju's arrangements, so she did not let him stretch his hand in. Now this matter seemed to be full of danger, but thinking about it, as long as Zhou Chengju bowed to Immortal Qin, it would be solved. But when Zhang Yan saw Zhou Chengju's expression, it seemed that things were not so simple. Otherwise, he was his hope for revenge. Compared to this matter, losing a little face would not be too difficult. Then there must be other reasons. Zhang Yan thought in his heart, what is senior apprentice brother Zhou worried about? Zhou Chengju said in a low voice, all these years, although my cultivation in Qinsang School is not as good as those few immortals, I do not have to rely on others. If I bow my head and admit defeat, losing face is nothing. There are still other ways to go. But once I reunite with Qin Yu, the sect leader will definitely not tolerate me, and you will be in even more danger. Zhang Lu understood. Zhou Chengju was in charge of Dan Ding Courtyard not only because his pill skills were brilliant, but also because of his high seniority. He did not favor any side, and was only closer to the sect leader. But once he reconciled with Immortal Qin would have the support of the elders, the support of the people outside, and the support of Zhou Chengju, who had the sect's 7 defensive pills. Then who would be the sect leader? Zhang Yan thought about it carefully and said, Senior brother, do you think Immortal Qin is doing this because of his disciple? Zhou Chengju was startled, then he stood up and walked a few steps before he suddenly turned his head and said, Junior brother, your judgment is really accurate, the possibility of this is extremely high. I heard that she has always been fond of this disciple. With my understanding of her, maybe she has the intention of accomplishing this matter, but it is impossible for her to lower her head to me, so she deliberately pointed the spearhead at you to force me to admit defeat, and then the matter between you and her disciple will naturally come to an end. AI, how could I not have thought of this? He patted the back of the chair and said, if Lao AI had thought of this, he wouldn't have been so passive. Zhang Yan smiled and said, I have connections with the Zhou family. Even if it's Qin Jinren, I'm afraid he won't dare to easily put his foot in. Zhou Chengju nodded and said, Lao AI, the Zhou family is powerful, and most of their power is in Yuxiao school. Their strength is not the slightest bit weaker than our Qinsang school, but back then I didn't tell Qin Yu the truth, otherwise with her temper, it would only ruin things. When he said this, he saw Zhang Yan sitting there with a smile, as if he didn't care about this matter at all. He couldn't help but have a strange light in his eyes and said, Junior brother, do you have any ideas? Zhang Yan nodded slightly and said, in fact, there is a way that can not only wash away the so-called suspicion on me, but it can also stop everyone's mouths, and if it succeeds, there may be great benefits. When Zhou Chengju heard this, his expression suddenly became a little more excited and said, tell me about it. Zhang Yan smiled and cupped his hands and said, Senior brother is well informed, why don't you first tell me about the situation between the three pools and our Qinsang school? Zhou Chengju didn't know why Zhang Yan mentioned this matter, but presumably he had his reasons, so he thought for a moment and sat down and said, although the pool of jade blood detained 400 of our sect's disciples, but Luo Mengzi also knows that he can't force too much, so he sent a letter to the head saying that he is willing to fight with Qinsang school to determine the ownership of the three pools. He will set up a formation in the southern Dang swamp, called the Four Symbols Deity Killing Formation. If our sect can break this formation, not only will he release all those disciples, he will also hand over the three pools. Zhang Yan smiled faintly and said, Luo Mengzi also said that if Qinsang school is defeated, he can still release those disciples, and also hand over the three pools, but he needs to give us 2 years. Zhou Chengju smiled and said, Luo Mengzi is astute. 2 years later. I'm afraid the Water Nation is already in chaos, we may not be able to do anything to them. He said as he shook his head, then as if he suddenly realized something, he looked up at Zhang Yan and said in surprise, Junior brother, where did you hear this news? I only heard it from the head not long ago, even the few spiritual masters don't know, the head definitely wouldn't tell you. Zhang Yan smiled faintly, his expression full of confidence, said, I didn't have nothing to do on Bamboo Knot Island these past few days, but I went out for a stroll and went to see this person. He dipped his hand into the tea in the cup, and drew an osmanthus flower on the table. Zhou Chengju's eyes flashed, then he stretched out his sleeve and wiped away the water, said, What did this person say? Zhang Yan smiled and said, Senior brother, please come closer. Zhou Chengju moved his body a little closer, and Zhang Yan's mouth moved, as if saying something. After listening, Zhou Chengju's eyes widened, then he sat there in deep thought. After a long time, he let out a long breath, and said, If it is really as Junior brother said, this matter is worth doing, and the head and this person are old acquaintances. It is said that this person helped the head out of danger, so he didn't lie to you. Zhang Yan cupped his hands and said, Even so, I still need Senior brother to run in the middle. Zhou Chengju's expression relaxed a little, he laughed and said, Don't worry, sitting in the position of the head, why would he care about these minor details? If you can really help the head this time, not only will the strength of the teacher and disciple line not be damaged, but they may even be able to turn the tables and suppress the aristocratic families. If your cultivation goes up another level, there will definitely be a place for you in the future. Zhang Yan couldn't help but nod. No matter how many schemes he had, in the face of such great benefits, they would all be crushed into powder. Zhou Chengju thought about this matter a few times in his mind. After thinking through all the details, he stood up and said, This matter should not be delayed, I will go to the head to discuss this matter now. He reached out and patted Zhang Yan's shoulder, saying, Junior brother, you have been gone for more than a month, you should go and see Yan Yi. She is now cultivating on Vulture Mountain, although I have done a lot for you, she is still your disciple after all. Zhang Yan nodded in agreement. Zhou Chengju smiled, swung his sleeves, and turned to leave the room. When Zhang Yan walked out, only the bamboo curtain swayed lightly. He walked out, looked up, and saw the clouds in the sky leisurely, and thought to himself, only by being above the 9 heavens can one be so free and unfettered, otherwise one will always be a chess piece. After looking for a while, he retracted his gaze, turned into a conveyance light, and flew towards Vulture Mountain. Vulture Mountain was directly east of where the fish boat was. This huge mountain was flat, and the flowers and plants on the mountain were luxuriant, beautiful, and eye-catching. As soon as he got close, he could smell a strange fragrance, intoxicating him. On the hillside, spiritual birds were pecking at the feathers, and auspicious beasts were snoring. It was much better than the desolate scene on Azure Wu Mountain that year when Zhang Yan was there. It could be seen that if a cultivator could meet a good master, he would be able to take a step forward on the path of the Great Tao. Lu Yenni's cultivation abode was in a hut at the top of the mountain. This place was full of spiritual energy, and there was an empty space in front, surrounded by a flower bed. When Zhang Yan landed in front of the hut, there were a few girls sweeping in the courtyard. They were all clever girls selected by Zhou Chengju from the 9 cities of the Xian Gui land trial, and specially sent over to take care of Lu Yenni. When they saw Zhang Yan descending from the cloud, the few girls widened their eyes and looked at him curiously. Before they were sent to be monks, they often heard from their parents that if one day a deity took a fancy to them, they would be able to ascend to the heavens. However, they were all in their early teens, and grew up in Jiu-Yi City. The city was filled with commoners, and the cultivators of Qinsang school rarely went there. They had never seen any deities, and only vaguely knew that there was such a group of people who lived in the same big swamp as them. When Zhou Chengju sent them here, in order to avoid trouble, he also cast a spell. Therefore, they were muddle-headed, and only felt that they were here when they woke up, and did not feel that there was anything strange about it. They were not allowed to leave this mountain, and the one who took care of them was a girl about the same age as them. At first, they were a little afraid, but after a long time, they could not see anything different from them, and so they became more open. However, they were all clever girls, and although they were not afraid, they were still respectful on the surface, and no one could find any fault with them. But now that they saw that there was actually someone who could fly in the sky and burrow into the ground, it was imaginable how shocked they were. One of the girls came forward timidly, and the other, bowed, said, "Where did this immortal come from?" "This is the place where little Miss Lu cultivates, and Academy Master Zhou ordered us not to let anyone in." Zhang Yan smiled, and just as he was about to speak, the door of the hut opened with a squeak, and Lu Yenni's delicate face appeared, and she cried out in surprise, "Master!" She walked out a few steps, knelt on the ground, and said, "Disciple greets Master." Zhang Yan was a little surprised. When he brought this disciple over, she had only stayed for a few hours. He thought that after not seeing her for so long, a little girl who was only a little over 10 years old would definitely be shy. He wanted to say something, but Lu Yenni's joy touched the deepest part of his heart, and there was not the slightest bit of falsehood. He could not help but sigh in his heart, "Looks like senior brother Zhou's teaching is really good. I'm afraid I'll have to trouble senior brother in the future." How could he know that Lu Yenni had been lonely and helpless at home since she was young, without parents, and relied on her aunt to support her? Later on, her aunt passed away, and her uncle planned to sell her. Luckily, Lu Tao came back in time to take her away, and she was saved from misfortune. But Lu Tao also had to cultivate, and did not have time to take care of her. His position on the island was not high, and he was always looked down upon by others. At such a young age, he could be considered to have tasted the warmth of the world. Chapter 126. Lu Yenni invited Zhang Yan to sit in the outer courtyard of the hut and served him a cup of fragrant tea. Zhang Yan casually looked around. Although the layout of the hut was simple, it was clean and tidy. In front of the door was a green bamboo curtain. To the north was a row of bookshelves. There was not a speck of dust, and the books were neatly arranged. With his eyesight, he could tell at a glance that although the pages of these books were occasionally flipped, each page was specially smoothed out without a single crease. He couldn't help but say, those boys really took good care of them. Lu Yenny pursed her lips and smiled, Master, this is a place of cultivation. Martial Uncle Zhou said that ordinary people can't enter, so I cleaned it myself. Oh. Zhang Yan looked at Lu Yenny a few more times and nodded, saying, Disciple, don't stand and talk, sit down. Lu Yenny shook her head and bowed to Zhang Yan, saying seriously, in the presence of Master, how can there be a seat for a disciple? Zhang Yan smiled, it was a good thing for a disciple to respect their master, so there was no need to force it. He warmly said, Disciple, is there anything you don't understand in your practice of the pure Qi scripture? Lu Yenny pinched the corner of her clothes and said in a low voice, there is nothing difficult about this scripture. After reading it once, I understand the meaning within. Zhang Yan nodded slightly and randomly picked out a few sentences for her to explain. Lu Yenny answered them one by one without making any mistakes. She didn't boast either. However, he didn't find it strange. He chose this girl to be his disciple because of her talent. In addition, she had Zhou Chengju's guidance, so it was natural that she knew these things. He asked, since there is nothing you don't understand, then why don't you have any cultivation these days? When he saw Lu Yenny's face, he knew that this female disciple didn't have any internal qi. At first, he felt it was strange. Lu Yenny's talent was good, and on the boat that day, it was clear that she was intelligent. Could it be because martial brother Zhou was too busy and there was no one to guide her? However, when he asked about it, he realized that it was not the case. Then, it was very likely that it was because of his laziness. If this was really the case, then this girl's heart was lacking, and she wasn't a true cultivation seed. However, he would still raise her, but from now on, he wouldn't treat her as a direct disciple. Although Zhang Yan's face was not stern, there was an indescribable pressure coming from him. When he said this, the surrounding air seemed to tighten. Lu Yenny felt her heart skip a beat, and she was somewhat breathless. She seemed to hesitate for a moment, as if she wanted to say something, but stopped herself. When Zhang Yan saw this, he slowly said, if you have anything to say, just say it. Lu Yenny bit her lips and bowed down, saying, Master, I heard from martial uncle that Master is proficient in erosion runes. In this aspect, even he is not as good as you. I wonder if you could give me a few pointers. When Zhang Yan heard this, he couldn't help but be surprised. How did you think of learning erosion runes? Lu Yenny knelt down and kowtowed to Zhang Yan. Then she said, Martial uncle said that erosion runes are the foundation of all Tao. It contains the truth of the great Tao. In ancient times, immortals comprehended erosion runes to become immortals. It is just that the younger generation is unworthy, and that is why it has fallen behind. Martial uncle also said that Master is a genius. Even without being taught anything, you can comprehend the profound truth of erosion runes. You can't see anything right now, but after cultivating for a long time, you will be one step ahead of others in becoming immortals. I am Master's first disciple, and if I am successful in cultivation in the future, I will not have the face to call myself Master's disciple if I don't understand erosion runes. Therefore, I sincerely ask Master to give me the original erosion runes of the pure breath scripture. No matter how difficult it is, I will learn it. When Zhang Yan heard this, he secretly nodded. Zhou Chengju must have been afraid of the Zhou family. Even if his Tao foundation was damaged and he had no hope of reaching the great Tao, his knowledge was still extraordinary. He warmly said, Good, I am happy that you have this thought. However, this matter cannot be accomplished in one go. Let me ask you, how long did you use to comprehend this book? How many pointers did you receive from senior martial brother Zhou? In a low voice Lu Yenny said, Ever since Zhou Shibua brought disciple here that day, disciple has not gone to disturb Shibua, and Shibua has not come here either. Zhang Yan was slightly surprised. He asked, Then who told you about these things in the Tao book? Lu Yeni shook her head. No one told me. I thought about it myself. What? This time, Zhang Yan was truly surprised. Not only could he tell that Lu Yeni was not deceiving him, but he could also see through the lie easily. With his disciple's intelligence, she would not do such a stupid thing to please him. He secretly sighed. He knew that Lu Yeni's aptitude was good, but he didn't expect it to be this good. It was as if she was gifted by heaven. He couldn't help but think that perhaps this disciple was really an extraordinary person in her previous life. That was good. The more intelligent this disciple was, the less worry he would have as a master. He immediately said, "Go get a brush and paper. Master will teach you the erosion runes today." Lu Yeni's face was full of joy. She jumped up from the ground, but she was shocked to find that she had lost her composure. She couldn't help but stick out her tongue. At this time, she finally showed some of the liveliness of a girl. Zhang Yan didn't mind. He smiled and said, "From now on, there will be no outsiders present, so there is no need to be too formal." Lu Yeni obediently agreed, but she still did not forget one of the necessary etiquette. After bringing the brush and ink, she picked up the teacup on the table. When Zhang Yan received it, she respectfully stood to the side. Zhang Yan took a sip of tea and put it down. The contents of the clear qi scripture flashed through his mind. Ever since he had opened his meridians, this was the first time he had recalled this technique. Now that he looked at it again, he felt that although the technique was simple, the content contained within was like a gem. He couldn't help but comprehend it. Reaching out, he picked up the brush and began to write on the paper. As he wrote, he explained the mysteries to Lu Yeni. His achievements in the erosion runes were unparalleled among the younger generation of Qinsang school. At this time, he was explaining it without any hesitation. Lu Yeni was extremely engrossed, and from time to time, she would ask a few questions. Unknowingly, 2 hours passed in the blink of an eye. As the master and disciple talked, the girls began to secretly watch from outside the window. They pricked up their little ears to listen to the various mysteries being discussed in the room. After listening for a few sentences, they saw that Zhang Yan didn't teach them any Dao techniques or supernatural powers. Instead, he only taught them some scribbled characters. They lost interest and began to laugh outside, catching butterflies. Zhang Yan didn't care about them. Today, he was deliberately teaching the erosion runes in front of the girls. If they were fated to meet, he wouldn't hesitate to teach them. After all, there were too few people who were talented in the erosion runes. Seeing that the girls had lost interest after a while, he sighed in his heart. How many people in this world are as talented as Lu Yeni? By the time Zhang Yan finished explaining the entire Taoist book, it was already dusk when he put down his brush. Outside the window, the sun was setting and the clouds were dyed red. A warm breeze brushed past, causing the papers on the table to flutter. Lu Yeni stretched out her jade-like wrist and took the paperweight. She leaned forward to study the book carefully, not wanting to waste a single moment. Zhang Yan nodded to himself. Hard work and talent. This disciple of his had a bright future ahead of her. Lu Yeni was completely focused on reading the Tao book. After she finished, she closed her eyes and stood there, her body swaying slightly. Zhang Yan smiled. He knew that his disciple had comprehended something and was unknowingly attracted to the Tao. She had already begun cultivating. He walked out of the room and waved his hand. A cloud rose up, isolating the inside from the outside world. Then, he began to protect his disciple. Lu Yeni stood there for half an hour. When she opened her eyes, they were as clear as water. With one look, Zhang Yan knew that her inner qi had sprouted. Zhang Yan shook his head. He thought about how his predecessor had spent 5 months to deduce the Tao Book of Erosion Runes. After that, he had worked hard for 3 months. Just now, his inner qi had sprouted. The difference between the two was huge. Those talented disciples of the big clans must have been the same, right? However, there was one thing that was not good. It was too easy, and they didn't know the hardships of cultivation. He absolutely couldn't let his disciple have such thoughts. After thinking for a while, he picked up a pen and wrote dozens of erosion runes on the paper. Even though there were only a few words, it was many times more complicated than the pure Qi scripture. These were the same words that were displayed on the star stele when he fought with the Guangyuan sect at the foot of the cloud peak. Seeing that he had written a lot of erosion runes, Lu Yeni also came over. Not long after, she couldn't help but frown. Her small face showed that she was slightly embarrassed. When she read the erosion runes, she didn't think that it was as difficult as Uncle Zhou had said. She felt a little proud, but now that she saw it, she didn't dare to think that way anymore. Zhang Yan said lightly, "If you want to learn the erosion runes, I will teach you. But remember, before you cultivate, you must first comprehend one word. After that, you can cultivate qi. Don't be greedy. Do you understand?" According to Lu Yeni's cultivation speed, it would be 1,000 miles a day. She would be able to smoothly condense qi and build essence. In order to prevent her Tao heart from becoming unstable, he had to suppress her cultivation speed. Lu Yeni nodded and said seriously, "Disciple will always remember master's words." Zhang Yan patted her childish shoulder, his eyes filled with praise. He said, "Well, I have to go back to my cave. I will come back to test disciple in the future. Disciple will send master off." Zhang Yan nodded. He dispersed the clouds and stepped out of the room. The sky was already dark and the moon was peeking through the clouds. He waved his long sleeves and stood up. A ray of light flashed in the sky and disappeared. Lu Yeni knelt down and bowed in the direction of Zhang Yanfei's departure before returning to her hut. Not long after, a bright yellow lamp lit up, and the silhouette of a little girl holding a piece of paper appeared on the window paper. 10 days after Zhang Yan left, a shocking news came from the Qinsang school. The 3 demon lords of the 3 lakes used 400 disciples as hostages to arrange the for divine beheading formation at the southern lake. They had a battle with the Taoist masters of the Qinsang school to decide the ownership of the 3 lakes. The 4 symbols god-slaying formation was a famous killing formation. This formation had a special characteristic, and that was that other than the formation I not moving, the changes within the formation were arranged by the person who set up the formation. It was absolutely impossible to deduce the changes from outside the formation. Even if one entered the formation and saw the changes, one could still rearrange the formation at any time. There was no way to catch it. To break the formation, at least 4 Taoist masters were needed to guard the 4 directions. Then, disciples who were not afraid of death rushed into the formation with the magic sword and talisman given by the school. Then, they would look for opportunities to hang the talisman on the 4 formation eyes. When the time came, it was possible to break the formation. But the disciples who came to cultivate the Tao were all seeking eternal life. This was practically a path of certain death. Not many people were truly willing to go. In that moment, the disciples of the various academies were all uneasy, afraid that they would be chosen by their masters and become ashes. But at this time, another shocking news came. The true disciple, Zhang Yan, volunteered to break the formation in order to clear his name. Chapter 127. That Zhang Yan is cultivating here. On top of the cloud, a dozen or so youths riding on flying boats looked down and pointed at them from time to time. Behind them was a young cultivator that didn't rely on anything and stood in the air. He looked to be around 17 or 18 years old, and a red light covered his body. It was obvious that he was a cultivator at the mystic light realm. The young cultivator looked at the billowing smoke on the Spirit Page Island and couldn't help but reveal a satisfied expression. He smiled and said, "It's just as the junior brothers said. Now that I want to refine the divine alpine flaming sparrow sword, the golden wind and blazing fire energy on this island is to my liking." A youth with short sleeves said confusedly, "If Brother Zhang wants to refine this sword, wouldn't it be safer to come here after that Zhang Yan dies?" Why is there a need to rush here? Another youth in blue was slightly dissatisfied and pushed him to the side. He scolded, "Idiot. Doesn't that make it seem like Brother Zhang is scared of him? He's just a person that's about to die. Did you forget how he humiliated us back at the Pill Cauldron Institution? At that time, I only wanted to ask for a few pills, but he actually locked me in the cellar with the Cloud Sun gold lock. Later, I was even expelled from the sect. Today, I will let him see what he can do even if we come back." Someone interrupted with a smile, "Why think so much? This Zhang Yan is only at the first level of the mystic light realm. If he really dares to do anything, Brother Zhang will deal with him. There's no need for us to worry." The young practitioner who was called Brother Zhang put his hands behind his back and said lightly, "If Zhang Yanrua knows what's good for him, he will give me this island. Since he is about to die, I will give him some face today. If he doesn't know what's good for him, I don't mind teaching him a lesson to avenge my junior brothers." This person's name was Wan Zhang, and he was a member of the Tai Shou Wan clan. Usually, he cultivated on the Scarlet Sun Island of the 4 Islands. This time, he had made a name for himself in the Battle of Surging Waves Lake. Since the battle, he had not encountered any decent opponents, so he could not help but become somewhat arrogant. In his generation, there are 6. The outstanding disciples of the 4 Islands, together with him, were known as the Fixed Star Abandoned Handsome. However, he was ranked last among the 6 talents. This was not because his cultivation was the weakest, but because he did not have a top-notch magic sword that could match his profound light. Although he had already found the materials to refine it, he did not have a suitable place to practice it. Zhang Yan's Spirit Page Island was extremely suitable, but because of Zhang Yan's identity as a true disciple, he didn't dare to rashly come looking for him. Now that he heard that Zhang Yan was going to die, he couldn't help but think of taking it for himself. The short-sleeved youth had a worried look on his face as he said, "Since this Zhang Yan is going to die, now that we've come to snatch his abode, he won't fight us to the death, will he?" The green-robed youth laughed out loud. "Junior brother, you don't understand. Even if these disciples die, the sect will send them to reincarnate. It's not like there's no chance for them to start over. If this Zhang Yan offends us, isn't he afraid that we'll do something to him while he's reincarnating?" The youths heard this and came to a realization. These few days, the disciples who were going to challenge the 4 symbols God-killing array had been selected. Most of them were disciples of the sect who had no hope of cultivating immortality in this life. If they died in the formation, there would be someone to take care of them. In addition, these people had been given a protective jade tablet by the sect beforehand. Even if their physical bodies were destroyed, they could send their primordial spirit out of the formation. The sect would naturally send them to be reincarnated as humans, and then pick them up in the future to cultivate. Therefore, in the eyes of the dozens of youths, since Zhang Yan was going to challenge the array, he was destined to have his physical body destroyed. If he dared to offend them, when his primordial spirit reincarnated, they could conveniently do something to him, or simply make his soul dissipate. No one would stand up for him. For the sake of his own future, how could he not have any scruples? On Spirit Page Island, Zhang Yan was sitting in his abode, reading a few letters in his hand. These few days, when they heard that he was going to challenge the death array, a few of his close friends had written to persuade him. Xie Zongyuan's letter advised him not to talk about life and death lightly. To be able to embark on the path of cultivation was an opportunity that could not be obtained in a few lifetimes. It was even more difficult to cultivate to this stage. If he were to reincarnate again, he would definitely lose the true knowledge of his previous life. Even if he had the protection of the sect and could start all over again, apart from a few powerful cultivators who were willing to die, most people might not achieve as much as they did in this life. Ning Chonggu also sent a letter, but his words were simple and did not say much. He only said that if Zhang Yan was unfortunate enough to fall in the array, he would naturally accept his reincarnated body as a disciple. What was most unexpected was that Feng Ming, who had also challenged the demon realm, actually sent a letter as well. He said that it was all because of Zhang Yan that he could get out of the demon realm. Although he was insignificant, if there was anything that needed his help, he would definitely do his best and would never shirk. Looking at the words in his letter, he was extremely sincere. The fickleness and warmth of human nature were all reflected in these few letters. However, Zhang Yan smiled slightly. How would you know what I'm planning? At this moment, he heard a commotion outside the abode. He raised his head and asked, "What's going on outside?" Shang Chang hurried into the abode. She curtsied and said, "Master, there are people from outside the island who have come to visit. They say that they are old acquaintances of Master, but this servant saw that all of them looked unfriendly. I'm afraid that they are not good people, so I dare not make the decision to let them in." Zhang Yan's eyebrows twitched. He got up and walked out of the abode. He raised his head to look at the sky. Ever since he embarked on the path of cultivation, he would never forget anyone he met. Now, with just a glance, he recognized the origin of this group of people. He narrowed his eyes slightly. He had not really died yet, and these demons had already jumped out. He immediately revealed a cold smile, took out the talisman from his sleeve, and casually opened the prohibition. He wanted to see what this group of people had come for. This group of people, led by Wan Zhang, landed in front of the abode as if there was no one else around. Zhang Yan looked again and found that most of the youths who had caused trouble at Danding Yard the last time were here. The blue-robed youth glared fiercely at Shang Chang, who was standing to the side. He clicked his tongue and said, "This Yu beauty is also not bad. Later, we will take her back and give her to eldest senior brother. It will also be good for him to pass on a few techniques to us. What do you think, junior brothers?" When the youths behind him heard this, they all clapped their hands and cheered. The blue-robed youth was even more pleased with himself. He glanced at Zhang Yan from the corner of his eyes. They had come here today to take revenge for the humiliation they had suffered that day. They had no intention of speaking nicely to Zhang Yan. Wan Zhang, who was walking in front, was slightly more composed. He walked forward and gave a perfunctory cupped fist salute. There was a faint mocking smile at the corner of his mouth. He said, "I am a member of the Tai Shou Wan clan. I cultivate on Scarlet Sun Island. Today, I need to refine a flying sword of the fire attribute. You are not lacking, so give it to me." His expression was as if it was a matter of course. He was sure that Zhang Yan would not dare to refuse. Zhang Dai did not answer him. He only pointed at the blue-robed youth's group and said indifferently, "I remember that these people have long been expelled from the sect. Why are they here now?" The blue-robed youth heard this and rushed forward. He scolded, "Zhang Yan, do you still think you are the true disciple from back then? Now that you are a person who is about to die, don't put on airs here. You should think about your family first. I was invited away back then, and I can be invited back today. What can you do?" A cold light flashed in Zhang Yan's eyes. He said, "In other words, you have returned to the sect without the permission of the sect? Sect rules?" The blue-robed youth laughed loudly. He turned to his companions and said, "What are the sect rules? I want to see who still has the guts to come here now." He had not finished speaking. Suddenly, a blue light flashed across his neck. His mouth opened and his eyes rolled back. His head fell from his neck. With a putong sound, the headless corpse fell to the ground. Zhang Yan said indifferently, "Jumping clowns, you dare to shout in front of me." This scene happened very suddenly. The youths who were still laughing froze. Their voices stopped abruptly. They stared blankly, wondering if they were still dreaming. But the head with the insolent expression was still lying there. At this moment, it looked a little twisted. It clearly told them that all of this was real. Even Wan Zhang was stunned. His face was full of disbelief. He pointed a trembling finger at Zhang Yan. He was shocked and angry at the same time. Zhang Yan, you dare to kill a fellow disciple? Zhang Yan laughed coldly. He said, expelled from the sect, how can you still call yourself a fellow disciple? You still dare to come back? You disregard the sect rules as nothing. That is seeking your own death. Why can't I kill you? Not only will I kill him, but since you have delivered yourselves to my door, then I will finish you all at once. These words were filled with killing intent. Seeing Zhang Yan's cold gaze, the 10 youths felt a chill all over their bodies. They were at a loss of what to do. Wan Zhang was enraged. He shouted, "You!" As soon as he said this, he felt a chill in his heart. He seemed to sense some danger. Shouting loudly, he used all his strength to dodge to the side. Suddenly, he felt a chill on his right shoulder. Looking back, he could not help but be shocked. One of his arms had actually disappeared without a trace. Seeing Wan Zhang unable to resist for even a moment in Zhang Yan's hands, someone shouted, "Run!" The youths came to their senses. They hurriedly took out their flying boats and magic tools, trying to escape in a flurry. Zhang Ji waved his sleeve. He shouted, "All of you, stay here." Suddenly, a blue light appeared, and only a sword light could be seen moving back and forth. It was impossible to tell how many sword lights were struck in that instant. When the sword chi dissipated, a total of 18 disciples of the 6 rivers and 4 islands were all killed on the spot by him, even their original spirits were minced. Only Wan Zhang was still breathing. This was also the reason why Zhang Yan did not take him seriously. Wan Zhang did not think that Zhang Yan would be so cruel. He was so scared that he did not care about anything else. He used a streak of light to escape. He shouted at the top of his lungs, "Zhang Yan, you dare to kill me. The 6 rivers and 4 islands will not let you go." Zhang Yan laughed coldly. With a streak of light, he also gave chase. Chapter 128. The 6 rivers and 4 islands were located in the southeast of the Great Lake of Dragon Lake. They were a group of 10 blessed lands and caves. The first river in the south was the White Desert River. The island's direct disciple, Sun Xian, was a member of the Liangliang Sun clan. She had been in the upper courtyard for 12 years and was at the 2nd level of the Mystic Light realm. Today, Sun Xian was entertaining an important guest in the cave. Sitting in front of her was a beautiful girl with her hair combed into a single bun. She wore a light yellow dress and was about 20 years old. Although she didn't put on any makeup, her skin was still very white and beautiful. After Sun Xian and Sun Xian chatted for a long time, the topic gradually shifted to their relatives. The girl smiled faintly and said, "Sister Sun brought your Zhilang back this time, which is a bit dangerous. If the deacon disciples of the Righteous Purity Courtyard find out, they will not be able to avoid punishment." Sun Xian waved her jade-like wrist and said carelessly, "Junior Sister Huang, you don't know, but Zhilang also changed his name when he came back. He only calls people by their middle name. Who would risk offending the 6 rivers and 4 islands to expose this matter? Could it be that Junior Sister will go and say it?" Junior Sister Huang's smile did not change. She said, "I heard sisters say that the person who forced Zhilang and the others out of the sect was the direct disciple Zhang Yan. Aren't you afraid that he will find out and cause trouble for sister and the others?" Sun Xian coldly snorted and said, "Junior Sister Huang, don't you know that Zhang Yan can't even take care of himself now? He is just a person who is about to die. This time, it was your esteemed teacher, Spiritual Master Qin, who came to make things difficult for him. He has no way out, and even monastery head Zhou can't protect him. He is about to charge into the formation and die. In the future, no matter how good he is, he will just have to reincarnate and cultivate again. How would he dare to meddle in the affairs of the 6 rivers and 4 islands? Does he not want to die fast enough?" Junior Sister Huang sighed softly. She was clear that after reincarnation, she would not have the memories of her previous life. That person would no longer be herself. Therefore, cultivators would not take this step unless they had no other choice. This Zhang Yan was rumored to be only 20 years old, and he was a true disciple. Moreover, he was highly regarded by Qi Yuntian and the others in the sect. Originally, he had a bright future ahead of him, but now he had to take this step. No matter how she looked at it, he had no other choice. She thought, "Junior sister Feng, it was you who harmed this person. Junior sister Feng, and you. Feng, asked you to protect him." Right at this moment, a maidservant hurriedly ran in without any notice and said in a panic, "Wife, bad news, bad news. Scarlet Sun Island's Wan Lulang is being chased by an unknown person, and he's coming here, shouting for wife's protection." This servant girl was Sun Xian's right-hand man. Seeing Sun Xian lose her composure and run in, she was scolding her. But when she heard this, the teacup in her hand trembled and a few drops of tea spilled out. She looked at Sun Xian in astonishment. "What did you say?" The servant girl said in panic, "Wan Jia's Lu Lang is being chased by someone. His life is in danger. The disciples on the island are trying to stop him, but many of them have already been injured by that person." "Wife, quickly," Sun Xian frowned. She threw the teacup on the ground and said angrily, "Who dares to come to my 6 rivers and 4 islands and act presumptuously?" Sun Xian and Wan Jia were in-laws. This Wan Zhang could be considered her relative. Putting that aside, he actually dared to attack someone on her island. Anger rose in her heart. For a moment, she couldn't care less about junior sister Huang. With a tap of her foot, she floated out of the cave and turned into a streak of white light that shot up into the sky. When she reached the top of the clouds and looked around, she saw a streak of red light fleeing in panic like a stray dog. Behind it, a dazzling blue light was hot on its heels. More than 10 disciples of the island tried to stop it with their flying boats and artifacts, but their cultivations were too weak. Before they could even make a move, they were knocked down and fell to the ground. It was unknown whether they were dead or alive. Sun Xian was even more furious when she saw this. Zhu Chun opened his mouth and scolded, "Where did this junior come from? Are you trying to bully my Baijuchuan?" Just now on Spirit Page Island, Wan Zhang was frightened by Zhang Yan's method of killing dozens of people. He had long lost his courage and didn't think about why Zhang Yan couldn't catch up to him despite being so much faster than him. Now that he saw Sun Xian, it was as if he had found a life-saving straw. He shouted at the top of his lungs, Sister Sun, save me! Save me!" Sun Xian frowned and thought to herself, "This Wan Lulang can be considered an expert of the younger generation of the Wan clan. Usually, he is a graceful and elegant young cultivator. Why is he so unbearable today?" Even though she had such thoughts in her heart, she still had to act to protect him. Her 2 slender fingers picked up a white handkerchief and shook it against the wind, releasing a wisp of white profound light that swept up the slightly exhausted Wan Zhang. She took a glance at him and couldn't help but be shocked. Exalted Wan Zhang was missing an arm, and his body was covered in blood. It was a ghastly sight. Sun Xian casually fed him 2 medicinal pills and said solemnly, "Zhang Lulang, who injured you?" "Zhang Yan, it's Zhang Yan. He killed Jiu Lang and the others. Everyone was killed by him, killed." Wan Zhang really thought that Zhang Yan was going to kill him. He was already scared out of his wits. Tears and snot flowed down his face as he ran for his life. At this time, he was already incoherent. Zhang Yan. Sun Xian's heart trembled. Jiu Lang was also a member of her Sun clan. She was sad to hear that he was killed, but she was even more surprised by another matter. Didn't this Zhang Yan lose his power? How could he be so bold? Killing people was not enough, he still wanted to bully them. It could be said that he was unscrupulous and reckless. But at this time, seeing that the blue light had already rushed over, she was also a decisive person. She no longer thought about those irrelevant things and pushed Wan Zhang to her subordinates. She shouted and leaped up to meet him, saying, "Zhang Yan, you." After Zhang Yan decided to go to death, in everyone's eyes, he was a person about to die. But who knew that before the ominous formation was broken, no matter what he did, the sect master would definitely protect him. Now was the time when he had no scruples. It could be said that his ferocity was monstrous. The 6 rivers and 4 islands actually came to provoke at this time. It was precisely his bad luck. Now that he saw Sun Xian, how could he be in the mood to talk nonsense with her? He raised his hand and a sword light slashed down. Sun Xian originally boasted that she had some status and wanted to put on airs. She never thought that Zhang Yan would actually attack without saying a word, treating her like a passerby. Her heart was incomparably angry, and she sneered, "Junior who doesn't know life from death." With a shake of her wrist, she released a white silk in the air and released the mysterious light on her body. In an instant, it expanded to 100 feet long and 100 feet wide like a white wave. This hatred deadly ribbon matched her own cultivation method, and she had refined it for more than 10 years. It was good at entangling weapons and absorbing magic treasures. No matter what flying sword or magic treasure attacked, as long as it fell into this ribbon and was contaminated by the essence of the white sea serpent, it would cut off the spiritual connection with its master. If a cultivator was wrapped in it, in a moment, their spiritual breath would be cut off by the white sea serpent's water chi, their consciousness would be destroyed, and they would become a walking corpse. In the battle at Surging Waves Lake, Sun Xian used this magic treasure to suppress and kill several demon generals and thousands of demon soldiers. Even some of her fellow Taoists avoided her, so she was very arrogant. She felt that with this magic treasure, she would be hard to find a match among her peers. Naturally, she did not put Zhang Yan in her eyes. She only wanted to take him down in one move, and then bring him back to be taught a lesson. Who knew that before she could completely set up the formation, Zhang Yan let out a long roar, his body leaping forward. After a flash of light, his body and sword merged. A sword light that was several times more fierce than before swept across the sky, and in the blink of an eye, it was in front of her. There was a slight panic in Sun Xian's eyes. Although this magic treasure of hers was very powerful, it required a lot of effort to use. When she fought the 3 pools, she always followed the others. No matter in front or behind, she had the protection of her fellow sect members. She did not have to worry about people coming to kill her, so she could naturally set up the formation calmly. But now, without the help of others, and the speed of Zhang Yan's sword light was extremely fast, there was no time to make any more preparations. At this time, she was forced by the monstrous killing intent from the sword light, and thinking of Tu Zhang's bloody appearance, her heart was somewhat afraid. How can this Zhang Yan be so fierce? He is already a person who is about to die. I will not risk my life to fight with him. Let's avoid his edge first. Sun Xian threw the white handkerchief in her hand forward, and hurriedly twisted her waist, about to ride the sword light to leave. The white handkerchief also contained a magic treasure that she had refined, and among it was a white mirage essence water. She thought that it would be able to delay for a moment, but just as the sword light was about to be wrapped up, it suddenly shook, and split into 2, becoming 2 rays of light. In a flash, they avoided the white handkerchief, and rushed towards her like lightning. Most of the mysterious light on Sun Xian's body was placed in the death-hatred belt, and now that she could not withdraw it, it was too late to stop it. She could not help but change her expression, and in a hurry, she could only raise her hand to block. The sword light flashed, and one of her hands was cut off. She could not help but scream, only then did she know that this Zhang Yan really dared to kill her. She could not care about anything else, and immediately turned to flee. Zhang Yan's eyes were cold, and with a shake of his hand, a drop of black water shot out. With a pang, it hit Sun Xian's back. She spat out a mouthful of blood, and immediately fainted. She fell from the cloud, and fell into the rolling white waves below. When the 2 of them exchanged blows, Wan Zhang had been watching in panic. When he saw that Sun Xian was showing signs of not being able to hold on, he did not even bother to look at the result. He pushed the people around him away, and with the carefree light, he rushed out of the Baizhuo River, and directly ran towards the second of the 6 rivers, the Jinyang River. Seeing that the red light on the horizon was fleeing again, Zhang Yan's lips curled into a cold sneer. He wanted this person to be like this, otherwise, how would he be able to enter the 6 rivers and 4 islands with the restrictions closed? Today, he would follow behind Wan Zhang, and trample through these sects one by one. Ever since he entered the sect, he had always been cautious. Even when he made a move, he was hindered by the sect's rules, and had to suppress it to a certain extent. It was like a giant trapped in a small room, always feeling like his hands and feet were tied, unable to stretch out. However, the battle just now made him feel carefree, sweeping away the stuffiness in his chest. Unconsciously, he let out a long roar towards the sky, like the roar of a dragon or tiger, shaking the skies, and spreading far and wide. Not only Baizhuo River, but other places in the 6 rivers and 4 islands could also vaguely hear it. Chapter 129. The 6 rivers and 4 isles were always connected. When Wan Zhang fled to the second river, Jinyang River, he had already noticed the commotion on Baizhuo River. Thus, many disciples came up to greet him. The cultivator in the lead was dressed in a Taoist robe and had a carefree scarf on his head. He had an awe-inspiring face and a solemn bearing. This person was the master of Jinyang River, Dai Xian, a member of Guangtong's Dai clan and also a direct disciple. He had once received guidance from the Qinsang school's sword immortal Luo Yuanhua and was skilled in swordsmanship. Wan Zhang rushed over in a panic. When he looked up, he saw a blue carefree light with an astonishing aura tailing behind him. He immediately went forward and wrapped his sleeves around Wan Zhang to protect him. At the same time, he raised his hand and a sword pellet shining with golden light leaped out from the top of his head and circled around his body. He shouted, "Who dares to harm the disciples of my 6 rivers and 4 isles?" Zhang Yan was flying as one with the stellar sword pellet. When he saw someone blocking his way, he didn't care who it was. He just activated the mysterious light on his body and a sword pellet split out and slashed at the person. Dai Xian saw that the person started fighting without saying a word and even used a sword pellet. He was so angry that he laughed, "You dare to use a sword in front of me?" It had been more than 20 years since he abandoned his original treasures and switched to the path of the sword. Although Luo Yuanhua had never taught him any superior sword techniques, he had managed to cultivate the separation and reunion technique with the help of the Zhengyuan sword scripture. Now, he could split his sword pellet into 3 sword beams. With this technique, he was able to suppress his peers. Usually, he thought that his swordsmanship was great and was always proud of it. Now that he saw that Zhang Yan was also using a sword, he scolded him in his heart, "You don't know the difference between life and death." Then he pointed with his finger, and the sword sphere beside him immediately flew out. Halfway through, it trembled slightly, and another sword sphere came out. The 2 sword lights advanced together and attacked Zhang Yan together. Dai Xian believed that with the demeanor of an expert, he would be able to frighten this unknown junior half to death with a split of his sword beam. Who knew that not only was Zhang Yan not flustered, he even sneered. That sword beam did not block, but instead sped up by a few notches. When it neared, the sword beam flickered, and a sword beam flew out from each side. A total of 5 sword beams tore through the air and pierced through the clouds. When Dai Xian saw this, his expression changed. But he was much more experienced than Sun Xian and reacted in time. He pressed down with his finger and exerted all his strength to split 2 sword silhouettes from the sword pellet to block the opponent. At the same time, he forced more than half of the mysterious light in his chest into a thin sword aura. He rubbed his chest and blew, and a white ray flew out. With a clang, the last sword pellet was slightly blocked. In a hurry, he had used all his strength. But what made him almost vomit blood was that although the 5 sword pellets were blocked, they didn't do anything else. They just leaped into the air and another 5 sword lights flew out. Controlling the sword with a single breath? Dai Xian was shocked and could no longer care about putting on airs. He said in a hoarse voice, "Which sword immortal is this?" "I am a disciple of Master Luo." Zhang Yan turned a deaf ear to his words and the sword lights didn't stop. They pierced through his chest and limbs, opening 5 bloody holes. Dai Xian screamed and fell from the clouds. Fortunately, his clansmen caught him in mid-air and saved him from falling to his death. On the other side, Wan Zhang, who had just caught his breath, jumped up in shock. Usually, when he saw Dai Xian acting like an expert, he thought that he would be able to stop Zhang Yan. But now, it seemed that he was not even a match for Sun Xian, being taken care of by Zhang Yan in a single exchange. How could he dare to stay? A profound light wrapped around his body, and he turned around and left. Zhang Yan didn't pay attention to the others after defeating Dai Xian. He rode on his skittering light and chased after him, one red and one blue rainbow disappearing into the horizon in the blink of an eye. Not long after the two left, a dazzling silver skittering light flew over from the direction of Baijuchuan and landed in a pavilion on Jinyang River. A woman appeared. She was beautiful and had a graceful figure. She wore a light yellow dress with narrow sleeves and a bun. She was the junior apprentice sister who chatted with Sun Xian in the cave abode. She looked around and saw that the people in front of Jinyang River were dejected as if they had encountered a disaster. She grabbed a passing disciple and asked, "I am Huang Weining, cultivating under the Langya Grotto. Where is your clan lord?" The disciple saw that it was Immortal Qin's disciple and didn't dare to ignore her. He said with a sad face, "My clan lord was pierced through the abdomen and limbs by an unknown person. He is seriously injured and can't get up now. If he dies like this, who will take care of us in the future?" Huang Weining furrowed her brows. These disciples of the cultivators of the 6 rivers and 4 islands usually did whatever they wanted just because they had someone backing them. Now that the river lord was injured, it was as if their parents had died. Huang Weining really looked down on them. But since she was here, she couldn't leave him in the lurch. She took out a vermilion pill from her pouch and placed it in the disciple's hand, saying, "Give this to your clan lord." She didn't say anything else and flew towards the 3rd river, Green Reef River. She saw that Zhang Yan defeated 2 direct disciples in a row in an instant. She thought, Junior apprentice Sister Feng said that this person is amazing. I didn't believe her at first, but now that I've seen it, it is indeed Junior apprentice Sister Feng who has a good eye for talent. But Hui Tong and the 3 Qian brothers are on the Green Reef River. They also had a great reputation during the Battle of Surging Waves Lake. This person might not be able to make it through. I want to see what the man that even a cold and arrogant girl like Junior apprentice Sister Feng is like. In less than a moment, she'd flown over to Green Reef River, yet she saw the scene before her eyes was a mess, and the degree of panic wasn't inferior to Jin Yangchuan in the slightest. She couldn't help but be surprised in her heart. Could it be that the 3 Qian brothers have been defeated in such a short amount of time? Her eyes flashed with disbelief. She grabbed a disciple and asked, "Where are the fellow Taoists Qian?" That disciple was grabbed, but when he turned around, he saw that it was a beautiful female cultivator. Her cultivation was also much higher than his. Although he was unwilling, he could only answer honestly. However, there was panic in his voice. Just now, there was a person chasing after Wan Lulang of Scarlet Sun Island. The 3 island masters went up to stop him, but this person was very unreasonable. The moment they met, he attacked. The 3 river masters were no match for him, and each of them lost an arm. Right now, they are recuperating in their cave abodes. Only then did Huang Weining confirm that it was really this Zhang Yan who had killed another river. She was also astonished. She composed herself and said in her heart, "Could it be that I still can't catch up to you?" She stomped her feet and turned into a ray of light, rushing towards the 4th river of the 6 rivers, the Violet Lightning River. Who would have thought that when she got here, she still didn't see a shadow? When she asked again, Zhang Yan went over again. The river master didn't even have the chance to use his transcendent artifact before he was cut down by a sword. He reacted quickly and didn't suffer any serious injuries. It was just that he didn't have the face to come out and meet people. Huang Weining shook her head and once again rode on the light to catch up. However, the further she went, the more astonished she became. Along the way, she passed by the Indigo Swallow River, the Black Embroidery River, the Green Rainbow Island, and the Jade Sky Island. The owners of these 4 abodes of immortals were either severely injured or dead. Their disciples were wailing and wailing. It was simply a scene of mourning. When Huang Weining thought about it, she was astonished. This Zhang Yan had already consecutively destroyed 6 rivers and 2 islands in less than 2 hours. She had been chasing behind him all the way, but she still couldn't kill as quickly as he did. Such a battle record was practically looking at these direct inheriting disciples as if they were chickens and dogs. Further ahead, she was already at the last 2 of the 4 islands, the Scarlet Sun Island and the Profound Journey Island. These 2 islands were connected to each other, as if they were one. If they were also destroyed, the 6 rivers and 4 islands would probably never be able to raise their heads in the sect again. Right at this moment, she suddenly heard a deafening whistle from afar. She could faintly see 100 or so rays of carefree light flying around in front of her, wandering around. She hurriedly got up and flew over there. Before she could get close, she saw 12 rays of light fly into the sky and fight with a ray of blue light. The speed of that ray of blue light was simply extremely fast. Looking ahead, it suddenly appeared behind. A ray of sword light swept back and forth. One person fought against 12 people alone, and not only did he not fall into a disadvantageous position. Instead, he forced the 12 people to retreat step by step. Huang Weining recognized them as the 12 sons of the Su clan of Profound Journey Island. These 12 people were also from the same clan. They were skilled in formations, and there were few who could match them in Surging Waves Lake. She didn't expect that at this moment, they would be suppressed by one person to the point where they couldn't even lift their heads. Seeing this scene, her heart was also filled with pride. She clapped her hands and praised, wielding a sword to soar through the sky. I can fight for 1,000 li unrestrained, looking down on the masses. This is the style of our generation. Right at this moment, rays of carefree light flew over from the 4 directions of north, south, east, and west. Zhang Yan, don't be arrogant. Feng Mang of Cloud Climbing Island is here to experience it. Wanpeng of Scarlet Sun Island is here. Xian Ru of Cold Star Island is here to greet fellow Taoists. Wei Tu of Thousand Mile Island. At this moment, not only were the remaining true disciples of the 6 rivers and 4 islands all here, even the disciples who had shown their talents in Surging Waves Lake had also arrived. These people were all famous among the younger generation of the aristocratic families. None of them were ordinary people. When Huang Weining saw them, she didn't know why, but a contradictory feeling of worry and anticipation rose in her heart. The young cultivator who had rushed over from the north had a high nose and deep eyes. The profound light under his feet was like a rolling black river. As soon as he arrived, he shouted, "Zhang Yan, don't go. Do you dare to fight with me?" Among the hundreds of disciples around him, someone recognized him and shouted, "It's senior brother Wei Tu, Zhang Yan is in trouble." A loud laugh came from the clouds. "Even if all of you come together, what do I have to fear?" Wei Tu snorted coldly and said, "Arrogant." Just as he was about to step forward, he saw the blue light above suddenly shake off the 12 Profound Journey disciples and stand upright in the air. Then, a sword pellet that was shining brightly jumped out. This sword pellet trembled in the air and split into a sword pellet that was exactly the same as the first one. Wei Tu sneered and said, "No wonder you're so arrogant. So you've cultivated the separation and reunion splitting light technique. Even if you can split another sword orb, so what?" However, as soon as he said this, his expression suddenly changed. The sword orbs all trembled and split into 2 more sword orbs. Then, These 4 star-like light spots split into 2 more sword orbs. In the end, there were a total of 16 sword orbs in the air. For a moment, sword chi soared into the sky and brilliant light shone. Everyone present gasped and exclaimed in disbelief, 16 swords in one breath? Everyone knew that although cultivators had countless methods to fight against their enemies, in terms of combat, sword cultivators were the strongest. Take the Shaoqing sword sect for example. The entire sect was a sword vault, so they were firmly the #1 sect in the Donghua continent. This was because once the sword light split, not only could they control it at will, but each sword was also like a treasure. Right now, if this Zhang Yan's 16 sword orbs came at him at the same time, how could he resist without a treasure or a superior cultivation technique? Take Dai Xin for example. This person could split into 4 sword lights, and when he attacked, it was like 4 treasures attacking at once. Although he couldn't even last 1 round in front of Zhang Yan, he was already hard to find a match among his peers. Even if his profound light was strong and he wasn't afraid of flying swords, he could leave as he pleased and couldn't do anything to him. The 16 sword orbs were high in the void, looking down on the common people like a king. Even the hundreds of disciples around could feel the monstrous battle intent that was willing to fight against the heavens and earth. At this moment, even Wei Tu had the thought that he couldn't fight against it. As if sensing his intention to retreat, all the sword orbs in the sky suddenly turned into a storm and attacked him. Wei Tu's mind went through countless countermeasures in an instant, but none of them were useful. He couldn't help but let out a long sigh and only used the river-like profound light under his feet to protect himself, allowing the opponent's sword light to hit him. He felt a sharp pain in several parts of his body, and his vision went black. He completely lost consciousness. From the perspective of others, Zhang Yan, who was standing in the clouds, only waved his hand, and a sword light fell, knocking Wei Tu down from the clouds. Everyone's faces turned pale. Suddenly, someone shouted, "This person is ruthless. He can't be defeated by one person. Brothers, let's attack together." Everyone instantly came to their senses and cheered. Dozens of lights leaped into the sky and surrounded Zhang Yan. In an instant, the magic treasures and flying swords danced around him, and all kinds of lights flashed. Zhang Yan sneered, and he did not care who it was. As long as there was a ray of light coming, he would point his finger, and the sword orb would turn into a ray of light that swept down, cutting down one at a time. Even though the protective mystic light treasure was powerful, it was still knocked down by the 16 sword orbs. Only now did everyone feel Wei Tu's pain. No matter how you changed, how could you change as much as the 16 sword orbs? Even if he wanted to escape, he couldn't be faster than the sword light. In the end, he could only take it head-on and was casually slashed down like a target. After Zhang Yan made a round, he felt that the sky was clear and the haze was gone. He looked around, and there was actually no one around him. He raised his head and laughed loudly. The 6 rivers and 4 islands are just so. After that, he let out a long howl, as if he wanted to vent all the anger in his heart. He shook his shoulder and turned into a rainbow light that flew away. Chapter 130. Zhang Yan single-handedly conquered 6 rivers and 4 islands in 2 hours. Once this news spread, it caused countless tremors in the Qinsang school. In this battle, he single-handedly swept back and forth, defeating 26 direct disciples in the school. Almost no one could stop him. In the Battle of Surging Waves Lake, how arrogant were the young disciples of the aristocratic families who were originally in the limelight. Who would have thought that in a single night, they would all be defeated by him? Hearing this, some of the disciples of the master and disciple lineage could not believe it at first, but after verifying it, all of them were wild with joy and excitement. The dejection from the defeat at the Jade Blood Pool was swept away. Who said that the master and disciple lineage had no one capable? Senior apprentice brother Zhang, with the sword in his hand, defeated all of you. After this matter spread throughout the school, whenever the junior disciples of the master and disciple lineage mentioned it, an image would appear in their minds, of a handsome cultivator in a black Taoist robe, sword light lingering around him, stepping on the void. One man with one sword, no one dared to go against him. Thinking about it, they would be moved, wishing they could be in his place. Heavenly Prisoner Peak, in front of the True Clarity courtyard, two disciples on duty were discussing excitedly. One of them said, Senior Apprentice Brother Zhang single-handedly conquered 6 rivers and 4 islands, greatly increasing the face of the master and disciple lineage. It really makes one yearn for it. The other person also praised, Senior Apprentice Brother Zhang was able to move unhindered, doing a great thing. It's a pity that because of seniority, I can't see Senior Apprentice Brother Zhang, otherwise I would praise him to his face. As the two were talking excitedly, one of them glanced to the side and saw a few streaks of light landing on the blue stone ground in front of the courtyard. His face couldn't help but change slightly, and he hurriedly said, Shu, be quiet, it's Chancellor Zhuang fainting. Everyone knew that Chancellor Zhuang fainting had been punished by the sect leader because of Zhang Yan, and was in a sorry state, almost losing his position. He must have hated Senior Apprentice Brother Zhang to the bone, and mentioning Senior Apprentice Brother Zhang in front of him was somewhat inappropriate, so the two quickly stopped talking. But when they thought of this, they admired Zhang Yan even more. Zhuang Bufan walked slowly towards them. He had 4 pupils in his eyes, and there was a tiger-striped beast by his feet. It was easy to recognize him. Rumor had it that he had inherited the legacy of an ascended senior from the Southern Flower faction. His Dao skills were profound, and he had mastered the strengths of both factions. Coupled with his rigid and strict personality, the ordinary disciples of Zhengqing courtyard were afraid of him. Walking next to him was a Taoist in red with a full beard and a majestic body. As he walked, the ground under his feet trembled. As he walked up the stairs, it made people wonder if the mountain gate would collapse from the tremors. This was a strange phenomenon of the second tier of the core transformation realm. To have such a sign, one must have formed a 6th grade core or above. The 2 deacon disciples recognized this person as Elder Go. He had come to Zhengqing courtyard many times recently, and it was said that he was looking for spirit energy for one of his elder brother's disciples to break through to the mystic light realm. However, Zhuang Bufan had used excuses to stop him from coming back, saying, I don't know why he's here again. Behind these 2 people was a tall and handsome young cultivator. However, he didn't speak much along the way, and his cultivation was only at the 3rd level of the bright Qi realm. Zhuang Bufan and Elder Go chatted as they walked, and it seemed like they were having a good time. When they passed by the 2 disciples, they didn't even walk 100 feet before the excited chatter started again. Elder Go heard everything clearly and didn't hide anything from Zhuang Bufan. His face revealed a smile that wasn't a smile as he said, I've seen that Zhang Yan before. Back then, it was my junior brother Chen who taught him his sword techniques. I didn't expect him to be so powerful now, to be able to single-handedly destroy the morale of the disciples of the 6 rivers and 4 islands. As he spoke up to hear, he turned his head and said, Martial nephew Feng Ming, if it wasn't for him, the stellar sword orb would have been yours, right? Feng Ming nodded slightly, but there was no resentment in his eyes. Zhuang Bufan's eyes flashed, and he said expressionlessly, Oh, the sword orb originally belonged to junior brother Feng. This Zhang Yan is truly tyrannical. It's a good thing that he's going to his death now. Elder Go laughed and said, Don't say that, martial nephew Zhuang. From the looks of it, the sword orb in Zhang Yan's hands is much better than in martial nephew Feng's hands. Zhuang Bufan replied indifferently, He's just a person who's about to die. Feng Ming had been quiet all this while, but at this moment, for some reason, he suddenly raised his head and roared at Zhuang Bufan, So what? Even if senior brother Zhang is going to his death, it's for the sake of the sect. It's a worthy death. What a heroic act. Zhuang Bufan, let me ask you, do you dare to go? He didn't expect Feng Ming to scold him to his face, and even with Zhuang Bufan's temperament, his expression changed slightly. However, Feng Ming's question was filled with righteousness, and he was standing on the side of righteousness. He was speechless. Elder Go seemed to be displeased as he reprimanded, Feng Ming, you're still not backing down. You're just a clear Qi third stage disciple, how can you be so rude to Zhuang Bufan? When we get back, I'll get Big Brother to teach you a lesson. Although his words were harsh, there was a hint of a smile on his face, and it was clear that he was biased. Not only that, he smiled at Zhuang Bufan and said, Martial nephew Zhuang, Martial nephew Feng isn't wrong, don't you think? There was a flash of anger on Zhuang Bufan's face, but he couldn't do anything. Not to mention, Elder Go's elder brother was an elder of the sect, and he was a Yuanying third stage cultivator. Unless he brought out his master, enlightened Zhu, he might not be able to suppress Feng Ming. He said coldly, Junior brother Feng, if you want to use the murderous punishment Qi to condense your Xian light, you can go to the back hall. Forgive me for not seeing you off. With that, he waved his sleeves and left. Elder Go sneered at Zhuang Bufan's back and patted Feng Ming's shoulder, Martial nephew Feng, you don't need to care about him. This Zhuang Bufan, I originally thought that it would be easier for you to use the murderous punishment Qi to cultivate, but I didn't expect him to come up with all sorts of excuses and talk about the sect's rules. This time, I used Dean Pan Hun's connections to send you here, so there's no need to care about his face. You and I, listen up, before the sect's competition, you must break through to the Xian light realm no matter what, and you don't need to care about anything else. Speaking of which, you're my elder brother's disciple, how can you let that brat Zhang Yan lose to you? Feng Ming shook his head and said, Senior brother Zhang is famous in the sect now, and I'm not as good as him. Moreover, he saved my life once, so I'm convinced of his abilities. Elder Go laughed, that brat Zhuang Bufan was right about one thing. This Zhang Yan is someone who's about to die, so what if he's strong? Hee, 16 swords in one breath, so strong. Ever since Luo Yuanhua achieved 12 swords in one breath, no one has been able to do this in the past 100 years. If he can survive, he will definitely shine in the sword competition between the 16 sections. However, the 4 divine beast god slaying array is too dangerous, and there's no chance of him surviving. What a pity, what a pity. Feng Ming couldn't help but ask, is this 4 divine beast god slaying array really that powerful? Is there really no chance of survival for those who try it? A solemn expression appeared on Elder Go's face as he slowly said, this array is extremely dangerous, and there are 3 demonic lords whose cultivations aren't weaker than those of the heavenly grotto heaven realm. It's said that there's another person whose power isn't any weaker than those 3. The 4 of them work together to create this array to deal with the people of the heavenly grotto heaven. No matter how strong Zhang Yan is, he's only a Xian light realm cultivator. Once the array starts, how can he come out alive? Feng Ming was speechless after hearing this. On the Bai Xian peak, Ning Chongxian and Qi Yuntian sat cross-legged on the peak of 2 mountains. A chessboard floated in the air between them. The 2 of them were focused on playing, and the battle was at its most intense moment. About 1 hour later, Qi Yuntian laughed and admitted defeat. Junior brother Ning's chess style is getting sharper and sharper, but there's one bad thing about it. If it's too hard, it's easy to break. If it's a little more tenacious, then I won't have any extravagant hopes of winning. Ning Chongxian said faintly, when we seek the Tao, we should be fierce and fierce. If there's anything that stands in our way, we just need to cut it down with one sword. Junior brother Zhang did very well this time, and teacher Sun also praised him. Such boldness doesn't hide his talent in the Tao of the sword. Qi Yuntian slowly nodded and said, Junior brother Zhang can actually split 16 swords in one breath. Originally, I thought that junior brother Zhang's pulse was only a low-grade mist phase. Even if he obtained the hidden book of the blue cloud, even if his Tao heart was firm, he would still have some achievements in the future, but no matter what, he wouldn't be able to surpass Martial Uncle Sunday. I didn't expect his talent in the Tao of the sword to be so high, but... Speaking up to here, he also shook his head. Originally, when Zhang Yan tried to break through the array, if he lent him a treasure, he might still be able to come out alive. But after challenging the 6 rivers and 4 islands, he didn't think this way anymore. 26 direct disciples of the aristocratic families were all injured by Zhang Yan, but none of them made a sound. That was because they knew that Zhang Yan was a dead man, and it was useless to fight. But if he came out alive with the power of a treasure, how could they let it go? Qi Yuntian sighed slightly. As the number 1 disciple of the 3rd generation, he was also going to take over the position of the sect master in the future. He also felt that it was a pity that such a talented disciple had to break through the death array. It was not easy to cultivate a sword. How could he have such achievements after reincarnation? Ning Chongxian pointed with his finger, and more than 300 chess pieces flew together and jumped into the chess pot. On the chessboard, a dim pattern of latitude and longitude appeared again. He said in a low voice, "If junior brother Zhang dies in the array, it will be for the sake of the sect. If someone tries to do something after reincarnation, the sword in my hand will also kill." Qi Yuntian pondered for a moment and said, "Junior brother Zhang's plan is to let junior brother Zhang cultivate under the sect after reincarnation?" Ning Chongxian nodded. Qi Yuntian also nodded and agreed, "Our heritage is not as deep as that of the aristocratic families in the Xianmen sect. Of course, we should be close to our disciples. If junior brother Zhang really dies in the death array, we should all protect his reincarnated spirit, so as not to disappoint the other disciples." Ning Chongxian smiled indifferently and said, "Of course." Qi Yuntian nodded slightly and said in a deep voice, "The aristocratic families are now aggressive. In another 5 days, the 4 enlightened masters will have to fight with the demons of the 3 Lakes Lake. Whether or not we can use this opportunity to turn the situation around, we will know after this battle." Chapter 131. 5 days later. Bamboo Island, South Dang Swamp. There were flying palaces and flying carriages on the mountain ridge. More than 500 Qinsang school disciples stood on the side of the mountain. Strange fragrances wafted over the island, and exotic flowers sprinkled everywhere. The mountain path was paved with jade steps and ribbons made of colorful beads. Above them, there were gorgeous curtains to hide the dust and gauze canopies to cover the sky. At the summit of the mountain, there were 4 canopies, and in the middle was a reed canopy, leaving an empty seat. The golden furnace immortal incense, precious weapons and spirit fruits were offered. As the leader of the 3rd generation disciples, Qi Yuntian stood at the front. He looked back and looked at the foot of the mountain. There were more than 100 cultivators here. Most of them were Ming Qi disciples and only a small portion were Mystic Light Realm cultivators. However, there were 3 core transformation cultivators. Their hair and beards were all white and they looked old. It was obvious that they were close to the end of their lifespans and were here to escape from the path of killing. Qi Yuntian sighed lightly, thinking that after today's battle, these 100+ disciples would probably be scattered like stars in the sky. Turning his gaze, he glanced at Zhang Yan's face and saw that he was calm and composed, without the slightest hint of panic. Qi Yuntian could not help but nod his head. At this moment, the disciples on both sides of the mountain path were whispering. Someone pointed at Zhang Yan and whispered, "Look, that's Senior Marshal Brother Zhang." The person beside him looked at him for a while and said with admiration, "Senior Marshal Brother Zhang is indeed extraordinary. No wonder he dared to kill his way to the 6 rivers and 4 islands by himself and challenge 26 core disciples of influential families." Since Zhang Yan was chosen as the son-in-law of the Zhou clan, his appearance was already extraordinary. Now that he had changed into a Taoist robe and stood with a sword in his hand, his sleeves fluttered in the wind, making him look even more elegant like an immortal. At first glance, he stood out from the crowd, exuding an aura of being aloof from the world. A female disciple said sadly, "Unfortunately, Senior Marshal Brother Zhang is going to die today. No matter how heroic he is, he will only be dust." Someone was unhappy and said, "Nonsense, Senior Marshal Brother Zhang is a good person. He can seek good fortune and avoid disaster." When these words were said, everyone sighed in disbelief, but no one refuted it. Even the four enlightened masters had to work together to break this fearsome formation. How could an ordinary disciple survive? Less than half an hour later, the sound of muffled thunder resounded above Bamboo Island. Everyone looked up and saw a 10-li-wide cloud of purple lightning rolling over. In the middle of the cloud, there was a roar of thunder and lightning. In an instant, 100 li of land was completely covered by the thick fog. Teacher Sun's Dharma image has arrived. Disciples welcome teacher. With Ning Chongxian in the lead, tens of people at the sides stood up and bowed. The dense fog slowly dissipated, and a young man with red cheeks and white teeth appeared from the sea of clouds. He entered a silver canopy and sat down. He waved his hand and said with a smile, "No need to stand on ceremony. You all know that I can't bear to see this." Ning Chongxian insisted, etiquette must not be abolished. Then, he led the disciples to bow to Sun Jinren before returning to their positions. Sun Jinren looked a little helpless. His clear eyes swept outside, and suddenly his eyes lit up. He raised his hand and pointed, saying, "Are you Zhang Yan? Come." Zhang Yan was about to take a step forward, but a fog lifted him up from under his feet. He felt his body swaying, and in the blink of an eye, he appeared in front of Sun Jinren. Enlightened Sun looked at him a few times, then suddenly laughed and said, "I heard that your family keeps quite a number of beauties. Now that you're going to charge into the death formation, it's useless to keep them. How about giving me two? You will benefit from it in the future." Zhang Yan smiled and cupped his hands, saying, "Enlightened Master, if I am not here, I will return them and return to my hometown of Water Sheen." It was obvious that Jinren's son was not angered. Instead, he clapped his hands and laughed. "When I was young, I received the guidance of a demoness, and that was how I embarked on the path of the Great Way. Unfortunately, she passed away many years ago, and even her primordial spirit is not known where she reincarnated. From then on, I treated both humans and demons equally. So what if I keep demonesses? If you can't get out of this formation today, I will protect the beauties by your side and keep them on Spirit Page Island. I will return them to you when you return to the sect. I want to see who dares to make things difficult for them." Zhuang Bufan was standing at the side of the mountain path, so he heard it clearly. Even though his expression did not change, his fingers could not help but tremble, and his back was drenched in cold sweat. At this time, a fiery cloud floated over from the horizon. Zhuang Bufan's expression brightened, and he heaved a sigh of relief. He took a step forward and bowed, saying, "Disciple greets honored master." Behind him, a dozen male and female disciples also came forward and bowed together. As soon as the fireball landed on the ground, it exploded with a loud bang. Sparks flew everywhere as the golden flames surged upwards, revealing 9 types of qi. When the flames descended, a tall Taoist wearing a deep purple robe appeared. He waved his sleeves at Zhuang Bufan and the others before entering a brocade tent and sitting down. He then closed his eyes and did not speak a word. Sun Jinren did not bother to talk to him. Seeing that Zhang Yan had the intention to leave, he smiled and said, "Zhang Yan, you can stand here, there is no need to go back." Although Zhang Yan knew that this place was too conspicuous, he could not disobey Sun Jinren's order, so he could only stand there without moving. When the disciples saw that he was standing next to Sun Jinren, it was obvious that he was highly regarded. Even though they knew that he was about to die, they could not help but feel envious. About half an hour later, enlightened Master Zhu opened his eyes and said, "Senior Marshal Brother Yan is here." A gentle breeze blew by, and countless green leaves floated to the island from an unknown place. A strange fragrance assailed the nostrils, and waves of clear air filled the air. Thousands of green bamboos rose from the ground, forming a sea of bamboos. The bamboos rustled in the wind. When this scene disappeared, a skinny Taoist stood on the golden canopy and bowed to Enlightened Master Zhu and Enlightened Master Sunday. Enlightened Master Zhu and Enlightened Master Sun also stood up to return the greeting. The three of them sat down. Although they were only a few feet apart, they did not disturb each other and did not speak. But before enlightened Master Yen sat down, he glanced at Zhang Yan indifferently and snorted softly. If other disciples were here, they would have been frightened and uneasy, but Zhang Yan's expression did not change, as if he did not hear it. After another half an hour, the hundreds of disciples suddenly heard loud splashing sounds of water, which then turned into rumbling galloping sounds. They couldn't help but turn their heads to look towards the south. Unexpectedly, the entire southern swamp's lake water was being drawn back by some unknown force, rising hundreds of feet into the air, and sweeping towards Bamboo Island. Except for a few people, all the disciples changed their expressions. Just as the water wave, which seemed to have the power to swallow thousands of miles, was about to fall, it suddenly disappeared out of thin air, and a middle-aged Taoist with 3 strands of black beard appeared. He had an elegant face, wore a pure yang crown on his head, and was dressed in a cloud robe of the 8 trigrams. When enlightened Master Zhu saw that the momentum of the water was unexpectedly withdrawn, his expression changed slightly, and he thought to himself, Big Senior Martial Brother's Northern Underworld true water is really inherited from my master. I'm afraid this form has already reached the consummate stage. Enlightened Master Yen stroked his beard without saying a word, and no one knew what he was thinking. Qi Yuntian and hundreds of disciples behind him bowed together, and said, Long live teacher. The 500 disciples present also said in unison, Welcome, Mengzhen. Mengzhen nodded with a smile, and then walked into the purple cloud canopy and sat down. Yan, Zhu, and Sun also came up to pay their respects, and after exchanging greetings with each other for a while, they returned to where they came from. Sun Jinren leaned forward and said, Big Senior Martial Brother, do you need me to go and observe the formation first? Mengzhen said with a smile, Wait a moment, Junior Martial Brother. There is still one more person coming. Sun Jinren thought for a moment, and understood the clues, and nodded slightly. Not long after, the sound of gurgling water came from all directions, like silk being spun out of a cocoon, continuous and continuous. After a while, countless clear spring water fell from the sky, and rolled up in the air 3 feet above the ground, and gathered in one place. The water was like the patter of spring rain, and also like a small stream hitting a stone, tinkling merrily. Soon, it converged into a water mirror with a radius of 5 miles, and white and pink lotuses rose from it, and then bloomed one after another. The petals of the top white lotus opened, and a delicate Taoist nun with willowy eyebrows and cherry-red cheeks appeared. Her eyebrows and eyes were picturesque, and her nose was smooth like jade, but her eyes were cold and fierce, and her aura was awe-inspiring. So it's enlightened Master Qin. The 4 enlightened masters stood up together and bowed to the 4 enlightened masters. Enlightened Master Qin moved her feet lightly, and bowed to the 4 enlightened masters. She opened her mouth slightly and said, For martial nephews, no need to be so polite. Her slender finger pointed downwards, and the lotus under her feet turned into a lotus seat. But before she sat down, her phoenix eyes swept over Zhang Yan with an imposing gaze. Zhang Yan's heart was firm, and he looked back at her calmly, his gaze was not fierce, and he thought to himself, Don't think that you are all high and mighty today, in the future, there will be a day when my mana and supernatural powers will far surpass yours. For some reason, this enlightened Master Qin, who was supposed to be the most hostile towards Zhang Yan, smiled. This smile was like 100 flowers blooming, and it was as if the heaven and earth lost their beauty. Then, she retracted her gaze, and sat down on the lotus seat. When the 5 enlightened masters arrived, Bamboo Island was shrouded in celestial energy, and a myriad of strange phenomena appeared. The changes of water and fire, the strange fragrances, and the flying flowers were all the manifestations of the enlightened master's Dharma. Once the Dharma was formed, the body would have a monstrous mana, and without moving, just using the Dharma to go out and attack the enemy. How could the disciples have seen such a scene before? Now that they saw it, they were all amazed, and felt that it was an eye-opener. Mengzhen said in a deep voice, Since enlightened Master Qin is here, the disciples will be safe. Junior brothers, follow me out of the formation." The three enlightened masters said in unison, "We will follow senior brother's order." The four enlightened masters each revealed their dharma, and walked towards the clouds. Immediately, the wind and clouds rolled, and half the sky was occupied by the celestial clouds. On the opposite shore, on the eagle-perching continent, there was a sea of clouds that stretched for thousands of miles. Murderous intent filled the air, and evil spirits were everywhere. In all four corners, there were divine beasts formed by the formation's chi. Indistinctly, one could hear the beating of drums in the sky, as if there were countless hidden weapons and horses. As if they also noticed the movement here, the few demon kings that were guarding the formation also released their dharma, and faced the four enlightened masters from afar, not showing any weakness. Meng Zhen looked over, and saw that in the east, there was a black-scaled python, rolling in a black cloud. Inside, there was thunder and lightning, and thousands of serpents followed closely. In the south, there was a jade carp. However, the horns on its head were raised, like a fish leaping over the dragon's gate. Its demonic aura was also soaring, and it split the sky. In the direction of the north, there was a thick and solid ice fog, and a huge black tortoise was breathing in and out spiritual energy, but its figure was faintly discernible, and it could not be seen clearly. It seemed like these demon masters' dharma, if they did not have the true inheritance of the ancient times, then most of them were using their original form to appear. Meng Zhen did not look too much, and looked towards the south. This person was specially ordered by the sect master to pay attention to, but with one look, he frowned. This dharma, however, showed a boundless wonderland. There were palaces, pavilions, and celestial music, but there was not a single trace of its origin. Chapter 132. Meng Zhen only knew that the one guarding the west was a nameless Taoist. Since he couldn't tell who he was, he shook his head and stopped looking at him. He took out a jade stone and threw it into the formation. Then he pinched his fingers and calculated carefully. The three Zenrins knew that he was sensing the chi movement in the formation and didn't dare to disturb him. A moment later, Jinren Meng put down his hand and said in a deep voice, "It really is the four symbols killing God formation. Judging from the chi dynamic, the door inside the formation will change every 4 hours, so it's not too difficult. But if you want to break the formation, there's only a sliver of chance when the yin and yang alternates every day. If you want to break the formation within 3 days, you can only try your best." Sun Jinren said, "Senior martial brother, why don't we go back to Bamboo Island to discuss this?" Meng Zhen nodded slightly and waved his sleeve. The four Zenrins rode the cloud back to Bamboo Island. After the several Jinren were seated under the canopy, the boy brought the fragrant fruits, vegetables, and wine to the table. He also lit the high incense sticks. The clear air curled up in spirals and a strange fragrance spread out. The boy bowed with cupped fists and retreated to the sides. Jinren Yen bowed to Meng Zhen and said, "Senior martial brother, it is almost noon. Why don't we let our disciples go in?" Meng Zhen sighed and said, "That is the only way." The four corners of the formation were the key to breaking the formation, but this place was the most dangerous. After the formation was activated, the person guarding the formation could combine the Fa Li of the other three people, and the power was several times stronger than before. Even if a few people from the Dongtian entered the formation and rushed in front of them, they would not be able to withstand the joint attack of the four people. Therefore, they could only rely on the disciples who were not afraid of death to enter the formation and follow the changes of the formation to the corners. Although they couldn't avoid death, as long as they left their magic tools, they could temporarily disturb the operation of the formation. As long as there was a chance to prevent the four formation masters from joining forces, the four Zenrins could break into the formation at this moment and break it. Jinren Yen said to a Taoist boy, "Go to the foot of the mountain and call 8 disciples up." The Taoist boy accepted the order and left. A moment later, the 8 disciples rode a flying carriage to the peak of the mountain. They got off the carriage in front of the stairs and stepped forward to greet the four spiritual masters. Within these 4 hours, no one would know how the door in the array would operate unless they entered the array. Thus, although these disciples said that they were trying to break the array, they were actually just testing the array. They would definitely die in the array. Jinren Meng sighed slightly and said, "Have you remembered the names of these disciples?" A boy came out from his side, bowed and said, "Teacher, I've memorized everything, I didn't miss anything." Meng Zhen nodded, and each of them placed a talisman on the foreheads of the 8 people. He said, "This is the method of stepping on the formation that I've taught you. All of you go and wait in front of the formation. If you see the spiritual chi falling from the 4 corners, you can enter the formation." The 8 disciples agreed in unison, took their instruments and left. They boarded the flying carriage and flew to the front of the formation. After they left, Meng Zhen said, "Guo Songyao will guard the black tortoise position, Luo Mengzi will guard the azure dragon position, Ziyue will guard the vermilion bird position, and that nameless Taoist will guard the white tiger position. Now the 4 symbols and 4 chi are moving back and forth. Junior Marshall brothers, we should first order our disciples to lock the spiritual chi and isolate it." Jinren Yan, Jinren Zhu, and Jinren Sun bowed together and said, "As you command, Senior Marshal brother." Meng Zhen took out a small black flag and said to Qi Yuntian, who was not far away, "Yuntian, take my overflowing square flag and go to the north to lock the qi. If the people in the formation make any rash moves, I'll come to help." Qi Yuntian bowed and said, "Yes, master." He took the flag and left. A moment later, a clear qi flew to the north. Jinren Yan also summoned a handsome young Taoist and said, "Luo Qingyu, take my white dragon golden lock and go to the west. If there are any changes, don't panic, I'll know." The young Taoist smiled and bowed, "As you command, master." After bowing, he also turned around and left. Jinren Zhu took out a magic sword and said coldly, "Zhuang Bufan, take my auspicious cloud red phoenix sword and go to the east." Zhuang Bufan didn't dare to be negligent. He stepped forward and respectfully accepted the sword, then retreated a few steps down the stone steps. Only then did he turn into a ray of light and flew towards the east. Sun Jinren smiled and waved to Ning Chongxian. He took out an ancient barnacle from his sleeve and said, "Chongxian, take my 5 thunder pot and go to the south. I don't think that old demon will dare to come out and find trouble with you." Ning Chongxian took the pot and bowed. He stood up and a green ray went to the south of the formation. The 4 symbols god-killing formation could absorb qi from all directions. If the qi was continuous, the formation could operate without any external force and its power could be increased by several times. If there were 4 true weapons in the 4 directions, it could cut off the qi from the outside. The person in charge of the formation could only use his own mana. But if the person in charge of the formation also had 4 true weapons in the formation, then this arrangement would be useless. However, true artifacts were hard to come by. Even the Yutzang sect didn't have many of them. The 3 lakes demonic beasts weren't so extravagant that they could take out 4 true artifacts at once. Even if they had one, it wouldn't be of much use. Instead, it would cause the formation to not function smoothly. It was because of this that Meng Zhen dared to let his disciples do what they wanted. However, the demons of the 3 lakes had obviously expected this, so they did not expect to operate the formation by relying on the evil qi. They had long agreed that from the beginning of breaking the formation to the end of the formation, there would only be 3 days. If the formation could not be broken within 3 days, the Dark Azure sect would have to admit defeat. Maintaining it for 3 days was really nothing to the few powerful beings with profound magical powers, so they didn't care too much about it. After about the time it takes for an incense stick to burn, everyone on the mountain peak looked into the distance and saw the lights on the 4 corners of the cloud formation suddenly disappear. Not long after, a boy came up and reported, "Ancestral Master, the 8 disciples have entered the formation." Meng Zhen closed his eyes and did not speak. An hour later, 8 rays of light flew to the peak and turned into 8 talismans. They landed in front of his table. These were the protective jade talismans of the 8 disciples. Now that they had protected their original spirits, it meant that none of them came out alive. Taoist Meng had already expected this, so his expression didn't change. His gaze swept over the jade tablet, and his lips moved as he asked the origin spirit in the jade. After a while, he nodded and said, I already know the changes in this formation during these 4 hours. Tong, go and call 8 more disciples over. Although the array formations in the world were ever-changing, they were all evolved from the 9 great origin arrays. Once they were activated, people could see the general pattern clearly. After a certain period of time, no matter how the array formation rotated, it would not break away from these patterns. However, this formation would change every 4 hours. When it came to the next challenge, he would have to use the lives of the disciples to calculate the changes during this period of time. If Qinsang School was willing to send more than 1,000 disciples to fill in the formation would definitely be broken. However, if they did so, the foundation of Qinsang School would be ruined. As a righteous sect, they could not do such a thing. When the boys summoned another 8 disciples, Taoist Meng sent a talisman into their sea of consciousness. Only then did he say, I've already informed you of the various changes that have occurred in this formation in the past 4 hours. The 8 of you will bring your celestial artifacts forward. You must not be confused by the scene in the formation, lest you mess up. If you can reach the corner of the formation, you don't need to care about anything else. Just throw your celestial artifacts. The 8 disciples bowed in agreement. Meng Zhen waved his sleeve and said, Go. He sat down and waited for another hour. When it was almost noon, another 8 rays of spiritual light flew to the peak. Meng Zhen looked at the sky and shook his head. He said, The hour has passed. Let's talk again at midnight. Only when yin and yang alternated between each day and noon would the 4 people's chi flow become sluggish. If it was any other time, it would be even harder to find a flaw in the formation. Time passed quickly, and when it was midnight, the 16 disciples who went to break the formation still returned empty-handed. The 4 enlightened masters sat in silence. When it was noon the next day, the 16 disciples still died in the formation. Only their primordial spirits returned. None of them managed to reach the corner of the formation. When the day came, after the first 8 disciples tested the formation, Taoist Meng sent out 32 disciples in one go. After waiting patiently for more than an hour, Taoist Meng suddenly opened his eyes. The other Taoists' expressions also changed. He pinched his fingers together to deduce, then sighed and said, It's a pity. Although a disciple on the vermilion bird's seat has successfully entered the corner of the formation, if I'm not wrong, the 4 of them purposely left a flaw to lure us into the formation. He shook his head. If there were disciples on both corners of the formation, it would be worth it even if it was a trap. As expected, none of the disciples who tried the formation came back alive today. Only the primordial spirits protected by the jade tokens flew back to the peak. In the night, dozens of firefly-like lights flew over, and the hundreds of disciples on the island were sad to see them. For the past 2 days, Zhang Yan had been watching coldly from the sidelines. When he saw this scene, he sighed in his heart, without great divine power and great magic power, longevity is nothing more than a dream. I'm just a chess piece that's being manipulated by others. Unless I become the chess player, only then will I be able to do as I please. Enlightened Master Yen said expressionlessly, Tomorrow is the last day. Senior brother, it's time to make a decision. Meng Zhen said in a deep voice, If they don't break the formation tomorrow at noon, they won't have a chance to break the formation at midnight. It's a pity that if the method I taught them can keep their original heart and not be disturbed by the formation, they can definitely break the formation and reach the corner. These disciples obviously know that they will die, but they are still afraid at the last moment, so they miss the opportunity. Enlightened Master Yen said expressionlessly, if their Taoist heart is firm, they won't be stagnant below the core transformation realm even if they are limited by their qualifications. Meng Zhen nodded slowly and said to the boy, Tong, go and summon the 3 junior brothers. Before long, 3 white-haired cultivators came up. They didn't kowtow to the 4 enlightened masters but just cupped their hands to greet them. These 3 people were of the same generation as the 4 enlightened masters. However, after they cultivated to the peak stage of the core transformation realm, they couldn't practice yuanying. Now that their lifespans were almost up, they could only seek to be freed from the killing path and reincarnate as a human to cultivate again. Meng Zhen stood up, cupped his hands, and said, Junior brothers, I'll have to trouble you tomorrow at noon. The 3 old men all had indifferent expressions. Obviously, they had already seen through life and death. They returned the greeting and said, We'll listen to senior brother's orders. Chapter 133. Now there were not many disciples who could break the formation. Apart from Zhang Yan, there were only 11 people left, 8 clear Qi disciples and 3 core transformation cultivators. If they wanted to break the formation, they must try all 4 corners of the formation. Apart from the 3 core transformation cultivators, Zhang Yan had the highest cultivation, so he must go. Hearing Jinren Yan's words, Meng Zhen also nodded in agreement. He looked at Sun Jian and said slowly, Junior martial brother Sun. What do you think? He also understood why his junior martial brother called Zhang Yan to his side. It was rare for there to be such an outstanding disciple in the sect, and he was not from an aristocratic family. Naturally, it was necessary to protect him. In the future, he might be an important help to the master and disciple. If the disciples in front could find an opportunity to break the formation, there was indeed no need for Zhang Yan to die. Therefore, Meng Zhen had not called Zhang Yan before, which was also to give face to his junior martial brother. But now it had come to this point. No matter how talented Zhang Yan was, since he had to go to the formation, he would die without a doubt. Fortunately, he could still be reincarnated. After a few years, there would be disciples in the sect who would accept him as a disciple. Although he might not have the achievements he had today, it was better than those ordinary people who didn't even have a chance. It was unknown whether it was a blessing or a curse. Sun Jinren also knew that it was useless to stop him at this time, so he said to Zhang Yan, take care of yourself. I will fulfill what I said before. It was still early before noon. Meng Zhen thought for a moment and took out 3 jade talisman. He pointed to the jade talisman and said, These 3 tribulation avoidance jade talisman were refined by the elders of the Duzhen Hall. They can block a full blow from the person guarding the formation. Although they can't really protect you, it's better than nothing. You can take them with you. This jade talisman was said to be able to avoid 3 disasters and 9 tribulations, but each person could only use it once in their life. Otherwise, if there were a few more, the 4 enlightened masters would be able to break the formation themselves. Sun Jinren raised his eyebrows and said in a low voice, Zhang Yan, go take one. Enlightened Master Zhu snorted and said, Junior martial brother Sun, this Zhang Yan is only a Xian light realm disciple. How is he qualified to take this jade talisman? This opportunity should be left to these 3 junior martial brothers. They are all core formation cultivators and have a greater chance of breaking the formation. Don't be too biased. Enlightened Master Sun chuckled and said, Senior martial brother Zhu, why do you say that? Putting aside his cultivation, Zhang Yan was a true disciple, and he was the first person to willingly challenge the formation. How could he not have a jade talisman to protect himself? Putting aside cultivation, Zhang Yan is an enlightened master and is the first person to volunteer to break the formation. How can he not get a jade talisman? Daoist Zhu didn't expect this junior martial brother to put aside the face between enlightened masters and directly accuse him of having a heart. His face suddenly became ugly, and he said, Why does junior martial brother Sun have to say this? I'm just stating the facts. Don't drag other things into it. Daoist Yen waved his horsetail whisk and said, Senior martial brother Zhu's opinion is correct. Junior martial brother Sun, don't say any more. Seeing his junior martial brothers arguing in front of him, Meng Zhen frowned and said, "Having the jade talisman is just delaying a trace of life. It isn't something that can avoid death. Junior martial brothers, don't argue anymore. Junior martial brother's son, the three enlightened masters have a greater chance of breaking the formation than Zhang Yan. Don't say any more, lest you hurt the harmony between the enlightened masters." Sun Jinren smiled and said casually, "Yes, senior martial brother." Daoist Meng raised his hand and tossed the 3 jade talismans to the top of the heads of the 3 core formation old men. This matter could be considered to have come to a conclusion. The 3 core transformation elders originally thought that they were going to die, so they didn't have much desire for the jade talisman. Therefore, they didn't dare to be interested in the conversation between the enlightened masters, as if it had nothing to do with them. Now that they got the jade talisman, they just slightly cupped their hands and didn't take it seriously. However, their behavior made Meng Zhen think highly of them. There was nothing to say about the Dao hearts of these junior martial brothers, but because of their limited aptitude, they couldn't go further. However, if they went to break the formation, he was sure that if an opportunity appeared, it would fall on these 3 people. In his eyes, Zhang Yan naturally couldn't be compared with them. Although Reverend Meng often disagreed with Reverend Zhu and Reverend Yan, he agreed with what they said this time. Zhang Yan naturally didn't care about these jade talisman. He cupped his hands and apologized to the enlightened masters, then walked to the side and meditated. His expression was free and easy, not the slightest bit of a person who was going to die. The 4 enlightened masters also sat under the imperial canopy, eyes closed, and meditated. Time flowed like water, and 10 hours passed in a flash. The red sun hung high in the sky, and golden light shone on Bamboo Island. Seeing that it was noon, Meng Zhen stroked his long beard and ordered in a deep voice, "The time is approaching, Tong Heir, order that person to search." The Tong Heir received the order and left. The remaining 8 disciples had already been taken care of last night and had been waiting at the foot of the mountain. Now that they had received the order, they didn't delay for even a moment and immediately took their magic tools and rushed into the formation. According to the previous agreement between Qinsang School and the 3 pools, today was the last day. If they couldn't break the formation, then Qinsang School would have to lower their heads and admit defeat, and their attack on the 3 pools would be considered a complete defeat. However, it was clear that the person guarding the formation also knew this, so he didn't do as he pleased like he did 2 days ago. Instead, he operated the formation with all his strength. The ominous formation seemed to have turbid waves in the sky, and thousands of ominous chi roiled. The 8 disciples didn't even enter the formation for a moment before they all died, turning into 8 rays of light and flying out of the formation. When the primordial spirits were protected by the jade token and flew to the table, Daoist Meng focused his attention and could not help but frown. Out of the 8 disciples, the furthest they could reach was the 36th change, and there were at least 100 changes in the array formation in these 4 hours. Although he was able to deduce the last dozens of changes with his profound knowledge of array formations, there were still some parts that were difficult to understand, and he was not very sure about them. He could only rely on his own experience to speculate and fill in the gaps. After thinking for a while, he nodded and stood up, saying in a deep voice, "The 4 of you, come up." The 3 core formation cultivators and Zhang Yan walked up together. Meng Zhen raised his hand, and 4 talismans flew out, each entering their sea of consciousness. As soon as the talisman entered the sea of consciousness, it automatically displayed the position of the formation and the path of the door, as if he had experienced it himself. As for how to move in the formation and how to deal with various situations, after entering the formation, one only needed to combine the spiritual energy with the talisman. At that time, the talisman would automatically jump out and guide the person to break the formation. Zhang Yan thought for a while and found that the changes in the formation were not difficult. When he deduced the erosion runes in the past, he had seen more complicated changes than this, but after watching it once, he remembered it all in his mind. Unlike the other disciples who could only rely on talismans, he believed that even if he didn't have the talisman, he could still break the formation. However, after looking back and forth a few times, he felt that something was wrong. Sure enough, the Taoist child brought a few more robes and said, "Please change into them, Uncle Masters." Mengzhen said, "This is the sect's 5-chi spirit suppression robe. It can restrain evil spirits and Maihun. Why don't you change into it?" Zhang Yan and the 3 transformation core cultivator changed into their magic robes. When they were ready, the 4 of them bid farewell to the few enlightened masters. Then, they rode on the light and flew toward the sea of clouds. Seeing him leave, many of the junior disciples on the island felt lost. Is this senior brother Zhang, who challenged the 611 islands in anger, going to be destroyed in this formation? Not far from Bamboo Island, a dragon Fang flying ship was floating in the sky. Fengzhen stood at the bow of the ship with his hands behind his back. Seeing Zhang Yan fly towards the sea of clouds, he could not help but let out a long sigh of relief. The danger was finally gone, and his second sister's thoughts were finally cut off. A smile appeared on his face. He had been standing here for 2 days and did not see a single person from the master and disciples sect come out of the formation. No matter how powerful this Zhang Yan was, he would die for sure this time. When he heard that the 611 islands were defeated by Zhang Yan alone, he was extremely shocked. After scheming several times, not only did this Zhang Yan not die, but he also became stronger and stronger. What kind of logic was this? But now, he could completely let go of this thought. The servant beside him came up and said, "Master, do you want to return to the mansion?" "No need." Fengzhen waved his arms and looked up at the clear sky. His mood was especially good. He slowly sat down and said, "Master, I am in a good mood today. I want to drink a cup here and slowly enjoy the sorry state this master and disciple sect is in." Although Zhang Yan moved together with the 3 transformation core cultivators, their cultivation was above his and they were extremely fast. Naturally, they would not go the same way as him. After a few flashes, they completely disappeared without a trace. Zhang Yan flew into the sky and was about to enter the sea of clouds. Suddenly, a black light leaped out from the void and drilled into the aperture between his eyebrows, then disappeared. Zhang Yan was startled and carefully examined. In his sea of knowledge, there was a black light standing upright, emitting an aura as deep as the sea. It quietly waited there, not moving, not showing any malice. Chapter 134. The power of the 4 symbols formation was concentrated on the 4 corners. It was self-sealing and hard to shake. Only the door leading to the middle of the formation was open to the outside, allowing anyone to enter. Hence, when Zhang Yan entered the formation, he also searched for this door and stepped inside. Once he entered the formation, all he saw was a stretch of dark gray clouds, leaving only a tunnel in the middle. This was the formation's open the door to attract guests. Meaning, when entering the formation would not be hurriedly activated, only concealing the murderous intention, only waiting for the person to enter the depths of the formation, only then would it suddenly activate. Zhang Yan knew this was the right thing to do, following this opened-up path and flew forward. Not a moment later, he arrived at a high platform with dozens of banners hanging all around. At this moment he heard a rumbling sound behind him. A sound, the culvert closed, the gray clouds above and below like muffled thunder rolled. On the high platform there were flying clouds holding out 4 large doors. These were the doors leading from the middle palace to the 4 directions. If the person who entered the formation wanted to enter the formation's corners, he could not go straight, only by entering from here, and then following the formation's evolution, walking in a zigzag manner, could he go deeper step by step. No matter which door you walked in, it would be connected to the 4 corners, only the changes were different. Mengzhen had deduced the changes behind these 4 doors. Naturally Zhang Yan was not afraid, also did not nitpick. He chose the door closest to him and strode in. Once he entered this door, the scene in front of him changed. Originally he could still see the scenery within 100 feet, now the surroundings were dark, the sky could not enter, the earth fire could not shine, dizziness, eyes dark and gloomy, unable to distinguish north from south. At this point, Zhang Yan could be considered to have officially stepped into this ominous formation. He was secretly on guard, at the same time pondering, according to his agreement with that person, after entering the formation, he only needed to use the mellow shield of containing harmony. That person would think of a way to guide him over, just that at the same time, that person also warned him. The closer to the formation corner he was guarding, the greater the chance. What kind of cultivation did that person have, to actually speak so cautiously? Zhang Yan knew that this was not without risk. In order to be safe, he decided to use all his strength to approach the formation corner. When there was no other way, then it would not be too late to use that magic treasure. He circulated his breath. The talisman bestowed by Meng Zhen flew out from his forehead, turning into a spiritual light that illuminated the 10 feet ahead, floating in front of him, guiding the way. He smiled slightly, did not hesitate to follow, thinking in his heart, if a disciple who does not understand formations enters, this talisman really must, otherwise, after a few steps, they will lose their direction. He had only taken a few steps forward, when the clouds in front of him parted. Thousands of fierce beasts with horns on their foreheads, like tigers and leopards, and wings on their backs rushed out, each of them roaring like thunder, ferocious and terrifying. A cold light flashed in Zhang Yan's eyes, and he let out a low shout. The stellar sword ball flew out from the top of the door. In a split second, it turned into 16 rays of light, and out of thin air, it turned into a vast stellar storm, twisting forward. However, this attack greatly exceeded Zhang Yan's expectations. These ferocious beasts seemed to be ferocious, but everywhere the sword light passed, it was as easy as sweeping through dry weeds. They were unable to resist it in the slightest. Zhang Yan felt strange, purposely letting a fierce beast near. He grabbed the fierce beast's neck. No matter how it struggled and roared, he did not let go. He focused his eyes and looked carefully. He couldn't help but come to a realization. He slapped the fierce beast with the back of his palm. This fierce beast dispersed. This fierce beast was only formed by the baleful aura of the formation. It did not have its own consciousness. It only knew to kill those who entered the formation. It looked powerful, but it was only equivalent to the cultivation of a cultivator after opening meridian. It was not even comparable to a clear chi cultivator. In front of him, it naturally could not withstand a single blow. However, if the disciple who entered the formation did not have a firm Tao heart, suddenly seeing this swarm of fierce beasts pouncing towards them, it would be hard to avoid panic, and once the guiding talisman in front was activated, it would not stop waiting for people. If the disciple who followed behind was a step too fast, a step too slow, or was obstructed by the fierce beasts in the formation, with just one mistake, the talisman would disappear. Without the talisman, they could only walk around randomly in the formation, not far from death. Zhang Yan understood the details of these fierce beasts. He was even more fearless. He followed the talisman for a while. There was no danger, although there were fierce beasts leaping out from time to time. With a few casual swings of his sword, a path was opened up. At this time, he had a rough idea of the reason why he could walk so smoothly, was because the direction that the talisman was pointing, was the path in the formation with the most vitality. As long as the formation changed, there must be life and death, strong and weak. This was not the benevolence of the person guarding the formation, but the fate of heaven. Without any special method, it had to be arranged in order to form the formation. This four symbols formation was no exception. Therefore, as long as it was a dangerous formation, it would constantly change, trying to hide the trace of vitality. The more changes, the faster the rotation, the harder this formation was to break. This four symbols the reason why Meng Zhen said it was not difficult, was because there were only about 100 changes. In other words, there were only about 100 small formations in it. The doors rotated, alternating and changing. As long as one could find the door with the most vitality every time, one could safely pass through the formation. However, there were pros and cons to this. The door with the most vitality was always the place that the person guarding the formation was guarding against. although the power could not be increased, it increased the path of changes, therefore it was the most complicated door out of all the doors. If one was not careful, it would be easy to take a wrong step. Zhang Yan also noticed that this path seemed to be the safest, but after a few steps, there would be ferocious beasts condensed from the baleful aura in the formation surging out. Even if they couldn't hurt you, they could still slow you down. Based on this calculation, even if his path was unimpeded, it would still take him more than 2 hours to reach the corner of the formation. He was considering if he should change to another door. Suddenly there were many fierce beasts leaping out from the front. With a thought, 16 sword gleams slashed forward. Not long after, all the beasts were destroyed. But this time, he sensed that something was wrong. These fierce beasts' cultivation was a little higher, almost at the realm of the first level of the clear chi. His eyebrows raised slightly. Could it be because he was going deeper into the formation? No. He immediately rejected this possibility. Even if that was the case, it should be a gradual increase, there would not be such a sudden change. After thinking about it, the only explanation was that one of the 3 core formation cultivators had already died in the formation. There was only so much malevolence in the formation. If there were more disciples in the formation, then they would all share the burden, making it easier to pass the formation. If he was alone, even if he went through the door with the most vitality, the cultivation of the fierce beasts inside would almost reach the realm of the mystic light realm, then he would definitely be slower and slower. After noon, even if he didn't die, the person controlling the formation would have their chi flow smoother, and the formation would operate much faster. At that time, the formation's power would increase instead of decreasing, and it would be even harder to pass. Thinking to there, his expression became serious. Then he couldn't do things the normal way anymore, he could only try to go through other doors. He had to rush to the northern corner of the formation before the 3 people all died. As he was thinking here, his body couldn't help but slow down, and the talisman in front of him disappeared in a while. He wasn't in a rush, and he took out the star-fixing plate that Meng Zhen had given him. He used his magic power, and the heavenly stems and earthly branches started to appear on it. Not only did it show the number of steps he took after entering the formation, but it also showed the direction he changed. If the disciples who entered the formation knew a bit about formations, then even if they lost the talisman, they could rely on this item to continue forward. He calculated there for a while, and a moment later, his eyes flashed as he took a step out. It was as if he had entered another world, and the scenery around him immediately changed. It was no longer dark and hard to see, but it was bright and dazzling. Tens of thousands of streaks of golden chi poured down like rain. Looking over, it was unknown how many strands of sword chi were descending. If one were to get a little closer and enter this place without any protective measures, they would probably be dismembered in an instant. Zhang Yan gave a loud shout, and a beam of golden and fiery mystic light shot out of his head, forming a 2-colored cloud over his head that was over 300 feet in diameter. No matter what kind of golden energy Zhang Yan threw at him, it would be swept away and ground into the purest spirit energy. At this time, the painting of mountains and rivers in his sleeve trembled, and a boy came out. He bowed and said, "Master, may I take this spiritual chi?" Zhang Yan asked curiously, "Zhang Ju, what do you want this spiritual chi for?" The boy said respectfully, "This chi is formed by the vitality of several powerful cultivators, and after being transformed by the formation, it is the purest. Whether it is used to nourish magic treasures, or to store it for other use in the future, it will be very beneficial." Zhang Yan laughed and said, "In that case, I'll give it all to you." The boy's face was filled with joy. He waved his hand and released the mountain and river painting. As soon as the magic treasure revealed its true form, it unfolded and turned into a 1,000-meter-long painting scroll that absorbed all of the spiritual chi that was scattered in the surroundings. At this time, Zhang Yan's eyebrows jumped, and the black light that had been staying still since entering the formation moved. A white-haired old man in black walked out and shouted at the boy. "Boy of mountains and rivers, do you still recognize me?" "Yes, yes." The boy was shocked and said, You aren't." The old man laughed and said, "It seems that you haven't forgotten me." The boy said in surprise, "Weren't you taken away by a Taoist from Chinsang school? Why are you with my master again?" The old man laughed and said, "Now, I am more free than you. After that Taoist ascended, I became an object without a master. Now, I was entrusted by someone to come here to settle a matter, so I borrowed the body of my master to temporarily leave it." The boy seemed to be a little afraid of this old man. He didn't know what the old man was planning, so he didn't dare to speak casually. The old man turned around and said, "Zhang Yan, I know what you and Qin Mabai are planning. I also came here on his request to help you, but now, I have a karma that needs to be settled by your hands. If you agree, I will repay you. You don't have to spend so much effort to arrange this matter, I will take care of it for you. What do you think?" Zhang Yan only needed to listen to the conversation between the two to know that this old man should be the true spirit of some powerful magic treasure, and he had a close relationship with Chinsang school. As for karma, he never cared about it. When his cultivation was high enough, he would cut it off one by one. You're tuning into the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.